Rain fell heavily across the old neighborhood in Enugu, beating noisily against rusty zinc roofs and muddy roads. The evening air smelled of wet earth and smoke from firewood kitchens scattered around the compound houses. Inside one of the smallest apartments near the end of the street, Chidinma stood quietly in front of a nearly empty pot. The dim kerosene lamp beside her flickered weakly, casting tired shadows across the tiny kitchen walls. The room was cramped, old, and poorly ventilated, but she had tried her best to keep it neat despite their struggles. Her eyes slowly moved toward the small plastic container where they normally kept Gary. Empty. She checked another bowl. Nothing. Not even a handful of rice remained. For a few seconds, she simply stood there in silence, staring at the empty kitchen as if food would suddenly appear by miracle. Then she inhaled slowly and forced herself not to cry. Obinna must not know. At least not tonight. The sound of footsteps outside the door made her straighten quickly. She wiped her face and adjusted her wrapper before her husband entered the room. Obinna looked exhausted. His faded shirt clung weakly to his body from the rain outside, and his shoulders sagged heavily like a man carrying invisible stones. Once upon a time, Obinna had been full of confidence and laughter. He used to walk with pride, leaving for work every morning in neatly ironed clothes. But that version of him was disappearing little by little. Months of unemployment had stolen the brightness from his eyes. "Chi!" he called softly as he entered. "I'm here," she answered quickly with a smile that looked stronger than she felt. Obinna dropped an old black file onto the table and sat down heavily on the wooden chair. Another failed job interview. She already knew without asking. Still, she walked closer carefully. "How did it go?" Obinna laughed bitterly. "The same thing again." Her heart sank. "What did they say this time?" "They said they'll call me." The silence that followed was painful. Both of them knew what those words meant. No call would come. Chidinma moved closer and gently rubbed his shoulder. "Something better will come." Obinna looked up at her face and managed a weak smile. "You always say that." "Because I believe it." He stared at her quietly for a moment before asking the question that always broke her heart. "Did you eat?" She nodded immediately. "Yes." But her voice lacked strength. Obinna narrowed his eyes suspiciously. "Are you sure?" "Yes now," she said quickly. "I ate in the afternoon." He stood up slowly and walked toward the kitchen corner. Before she could stop him, he opened the pot. Empty. Another bowl. Empty. The Gary container. Completely empty. Obinna froze. His chest tightened painfully. He turned slowly toward his wife. "Chidinma." She forced another smile. "It's okay. You didn't eat." "I'm not hungry." "Stop lying to me." The pain in his voice nearly shattered her composure. She looked away quietly. Obinna closed his eyes for a few seconds, ashamed of himself. A whole man, unable to feed his wife. The humiliation burned inside him every single day. Sometimes he avoided old friends because he could no longer bear the pity in their eyes. Other times, he walked long distances home because he could not afford transport fare. But the hardest part of all was seeing Chidinma suffer because of him. He leaned against the wall and covered his face briefly. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The moment those words left his mouth, Chidinma's expression changed instantly. She hated hearing him apologize. Immediately, she walked toward him and held both his hands firmly. "Don't say that again. But look at our life. Our life is not over. I can't even provide food for you. You provided for me before. That was before. And this is now," she replied softly. "Marriage is not only for good times, Obinna." He looked down helplessly. "If you had married another man, maybe." "Stop." Her voice became firm. "I didn't marry another man. I married you." Obinna swallowed hard as emotion filled his chest. Sometimes he wondered how he got lucky enough to marry a woman like her. Many women would have left already. Some actually advised her to. Neighbors whispered constantly about their childless marriage and growing poverty. Some mocked her openly. Others mocked her secretly. Yet Chidinma remained, still smiling, still encouraging him, still believing in him when even he no longer believed in himself. That alone made him love her even more. "I'll find something soon," he said quietly. "I know. You trust me that much?" "With my whole heart." Obinna looked away quickly because his eyes were beginning to water. To distract himself, he removed his wet shirt and sat near the window while rain continued falling outside. The room suddenly became silent except for the sound of raindrops striking the roof. Chidinma quietly moved back to the kitchen area and poured water into 2 cups. "That would be dinner tonight. Water." As she handed him the cup, Obinna stared at it painfully. "You too." She nodded with a playful smile. "Today we are fasting together." Despite himself, Obinna laughed softly. "You're impossible. And you love me like that." "That's true." For a brief moment, the heaviness in the room eased slightly. But later that night, after Obinna fell asleep on the thin mattress, Chidinma remained awake. The room was dark except for moonlight slipping faintly through the small window. Carefully, she sat up and reached beneath the mattress. From underneath, she pulled out a tiny black nylon bag. Inside were squeezed and folded Naira notes, her secret savings. She opened it gently and began counting. 1,000 point, 2,000 point, 5,000. Not much, but to her it was survival. Every single Naira inside that bag came from hard labor. Washing neighbors' clothes, selling akara before sunrise, helping market women clean stalls, sometimes even skipping meals so she could save more. Obinna knew she occasionally helped people around the neighborhood, but he had no idea how much she worked behind his back just to support their home. Chidinma stared at the money quietly. Then her eyes moved toward her sleeping husband. Even in sleep, worry remained visible on his face. His brows stayed slightly squeezed together like a man fighting invisible battles inside his dreams. Her chest tightened painfully. Before losing his job, Obinna had taken care of her beautifully. He was not rich then, but he was responsible. Every payday he bought her small gifts. Sometimes roasted corn on rainy evenings. Sometimes cheap jewelry from roadside sellers. Sometimes just biscuits and soft drinks after church. But he always made sure she smiled. When people mocked them for not having children after 4 years of marriage, Obinna defended her fiercely. "She is my wife, not a baby-making machine," he once told a relative publicly. That day, Chidinma cried secretly from happiness. Now life had turned cruel toward him, and somehow he still worried more about her than himself. She folded the money carefully and whispered softly into the darkness, "God, please help my husband." Tears rolled down her cheeks silently, not because she regretted marrying him. Never. But because watching someone you love suffer could destroy a person slowly. The next morning, Chidinma woke before dawn as usual. The rain had stopped, leaving behind muddy streets and cold morning air. Quietly, she tied her wrapper tightly around her waist and prepared akara batter in a small bowl. She planned to sell by the roadside before Obinna woke up. If she was lucky, she could make enough money to buy rice. As she prepared the small charcoal stove outside, their elderly neighbor, Mama Bizi, approached slowly carrying a bucket. "Ah, Chidinma," the old woman greeted. "You're awake already?" "Yes, Mama." Mama Bizi watched her silently for a moment. "You're trying too hard." Chidinma smiled faintly. "What choice do we have?" The older woman sighed deeply. "That your husband? Has he still not found work?" Chidinma shook her head. The woman adjusted her wrapper. "You're a good woman. Many girls nowadays would have run away." Chidinma smiled politely but said nothing. She had heard similar comments too many times. People acted surprised that she remained loyal to her husband because poverty had become one of the biggest tests of marriage. Some women in the area even mocked her directly. One once told her openly, Love does not cook soup. But Chidinma never listened, because they did not know Obinna the way she did. They never saw the nights he stayed awake worrying, the silent tears he hid, the shame he carried. They only saw a jobless man. She saw a good man going through hardship, and to her that difference mattered. By sunrise, smoke rose from her small Acura stand as people slowly began moving through the streets. Some bought from her. Some only greeted her. A few women nearby whispered among themselves while glancing in her direction. She's still suffering there. No child too. God forbid that kind of life. Chidinma heard every word. Still, she kept frying Acura quietly. Her dignity was one thing poverty had not stolen from her. Hours later, she returned home with a small nylon containing rice, tomatoes, and onions. As she entered the room, she found Obinna sitting quietly with his head lowered. Immediately, her smile faded. What happened? He looked up slowly. I went to meet the landlord this morning. Her heart skipped. And he said if we don't pay part of the rent before next month, we should leave. Silence filled the room. Chidinma slowly set the food down. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Then unexpectedly, Obinna laughed bitterly. Maybe I'm cursed. Don't say that. Everything is failing. She walked toward him immediately. No. Look around us, Chidinma. We're still alive. That's not enough. It is enough to start again. Obinna stared at her. Sometimes he genuinely wondered where her strength came from. How could someone suffering this much still speak with hope? Chidinma gently touched his cheek. You will rise again. He held her hand tightly against his face. And for the first time in many weeks, Obinna allowed himself to believe it might actually be true. The following weeks were some of the hardest Chidinma and Obinna had ever faced together. Every morning before sunrise, Obinna left the house carrying his old black file filled with certificates and photocopies of documents. He moved from one office to another under the scorching Enugu sun, searching desperately for employment. And every evening, he returned home with the same defeated expression. No vacancy. We'll get back to you. You're overqualified. We already filled the position. The rejection was endless. Slowly, even his confidence began to disappear. One afternoon, Obinna sat quietly outside their apartment on an old wooden bench, staring blankly at children playing football in the muddy street. He barely noticed Chidinma approaching with a small nylon bag of vegetables from the market. You're outside? She asked softly. Obinna nodded absent-mindedly. She sat beside him carefully. What are you thinking about? He laughed dryly. Honestly, I don't even know anymore. Chidinma looked at him quietly. His beard had grown rough from stress. His eyes looked tired all the time now. Even his posture had changed. This was no longer the energetic man she married. Poverty was slowly crushing his spirit. I met Emeka today, he continued bitterly. Your university friend? Yes. What did he say? Obinna looked away in embarrassment. He pretended not to see me. Chidinma's chest tightened painfully. Some people behaved strangely around poor people, especially those who once had promise. Before losing his job, Obinna had been respected, intelligent, ambitious, full of dreams. Now many people treated him like failure was contagious. He's the one that used to borrow money from you in school, Chidinma said quietly. Obinna laughed again. Life changes quickly. She gently placed her hand over his. This season will pass. He looked at her for a long moment. You still believe that? With everything inside me. Before he could respond, his old phone suddenly rang loudly inside his pocket. Obinna frowned. Unknown number. He almost ignored it. But Chidinma nudged him. Pick it. He answered slowly. Hello. At first, his expression remained blank. Then suddenly, his posture changed completely. What? Chidinma sat upright immediately. Obinna stood up from the bench. Wait. Say that again? His voice trembled now. The caller continued speaking. Obinna began pacing nervously. Yes, yes, I remember him. Chidinma's heart started racing. Who was calling? After several more seconds, Obinna finally ended the call slowly. Then he stood frozen, completely speechless. Obinna, Chidinma asked anxiously. What happened? He turned toward her slowly like someone trapped inside a dream. That was Kelvin. The Kelvin from university? He nodded quickly. What did he say? Obinna swallowed hard. He lives in America now. Chidinma's eyes widened. America? He works for an engineering company in Texas. Her breathing quickened. And Obinna stared at her in disbelief. He recommended me for a position there. For a second, Chidinma could not speak. Then excitement exploded across her face. What? Obinna laughed nervously. They need workers urgently. They already checked my qualifications. Oh my God! They said the pay is huge. Chidinma grabbed his arm tightly. Are you serious? Yes. For the first time in many months, genuine hope entered their tiny home. Obinna's hands shook as he explained everything. The company specialized in industrial construction and needed experienced engineers quickly for a large project expansion. Accommodation would be provided. Transportation included. Medical insurance covered. The annual salary sounded unreal. Completely unreal. Chidinma stared at him in shock. That kind of money. I know. Obinna, that's millions in naira. I know. For the first time in months, both of them laughed together freely. Felt strange. Almost unfamiliar. Like joy returning after a long absence. But suddenly, Obinna's smile faded. There's one problem. Chidinma's heart dropped immediately. What happened? They said I need to process my visa urgently. That's normal. It's expensive. The excitement in the room dimmed instantly. Obinna sat down slowly and rubbed his forehead. The visa processing, medicals, passport renewal, flight arrangements, everything together is too much. How much? When he mentioned the amount, Chidinma's stomach tightened. It was far beyond what they currently had. Silence settled heavily between them. Outside, neighbors laughed and chatted freely, unaware that inside the tiny apartment, two people were standing at the edge of a life-changing opportunity they might not be able to afford. Obinna leaned back tiredly. Maybe this is how life works. What do you mean? You finally see hope. Then reality reminds you who you are. Don't talk like that. I'm serious. He stood up and walked toward the small window. I don't even have transport money some days. How am I supposed to travel to America? Chidinma watched him quietly. Then slowly, she stood up and entered the bedroom corner. A few moments later, she returned holding the small black nylon bag, the same one hidden beneath their mattress. Obinna frowned. What's that? She placed it carefully into his hands. Open it. Confused, he untied the knot. The moment he saw the money inside, he froze. His eyes widened slowly. Chidinma. She said nothing. Obinna looked inside again. Bundles of squeezed naira notes filled the bag. Not huge wealth, but enough to make a difference. He looked back at her in complete shock. Where did you get all this? I saved it. All this? She nodded gently. Obinna stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. How long have you been saving? A while. From what? Chidinma smiled faintly. From washing clothes, selling akara, helping people in the market. Obinna's throat tightened instantly. You did all this? For us? His eyes began turning red. No. Yes. Chidinma. I knew someday an opportunity would come. Obinna could barely breathe properly. While he was drowning in frustration and self-pity, this woman had quietly been carrying the burden beside him without complaining. He sat down slowly, overwhelmed. This is your sweat. It's our future. she corrected softly. Tears gathered in his eyes immediately. No woman should suffer like this because of a man. But I'm your wife. That's exactly why you shouldn't. Chidinma knelt beside him and held his hands gently. Listen to me carefully, she said. We are not fighting each other. We are fighting life together. That sentence broke something inside him completely. Obinna covered his face and cried openly. Months of bottled pain finally escaped. The shame, the frustration, the helplessness, everything poured out at once. And Chidinma simply held him quietly. No judgment, no complaints. Only love. That night, for the first time in many months, they prayed together with real hope. God, Obinna whispered emotionally, if this opportunity is truly from you, please make a way for us. Beside him, Chidinma squeezed his hand tightly. Amen. The following days became extremely busy. They borrowed documents, visited cyber cafes, filled forms, took passport photographs. Every step felt stressful and expensive. Still, somehow, things kept moving forward. Even the visa interview date came faster than expected. The night before the interview, Obinna could barely sleep. What if they reject me? He asked nervously. Chidinma adjusted his tie gently. They won't. How are you so sure? Because this door was opened for you. He looked at her uncertainly. What if I fail? She smiled softly. Then we stand up again. The next morning, Obinna traveled for the interview while Chidinma stayed home praying almost nonstop. Hours later, her phone rang. She answered immediately. Obinna. For a few seconds, all she heard was breathing. Then, they approved it. Chidinma screamed so loudly that neighbors rushed outside thinking something terrible had happened. Instead, they found her crying and laughing at the same time. My husband is going to America. News spread across the neighborhood almost instantly. Suddenly, people who once ignored them started greeting them warmly. Women who mocked Chidinma before suddenly became friendly. Ah, Chidinma, congratulations. We always knew Obinna would succeed. God has remembered your family. Even distant relatives began calling. Obinna noticed the sudden change too. One man who refused to help him months earlier now invited him for drinks. Another offered unnecessary advice about living abroad. But through it all, Chidinma remained focused only on one thing, her husband's future. As departure day approached, emotions became heavier inside their little apartment. At night, they talked for hours about their dreams. We'll finally leave this place someday, Obinna said quietly. Chidinma smiled. I'll miss this room, though. This tiny room? Yes, he laughed. Why? Because we survived here together. That touched him deeply. 3 nights before his flight, Obinna sat quietly watching her fold his clothes neatly into an old travel bag. You know, he said softly, I'm scared. She looked up. Of America? No. Then what? He hesitated. I'm scared of leaving you behind. Chidinma walked toward him slowly. You're not leaving me behind. It feels like it. She sat beside him. You're going so you can build a future for us. He held her hands tightly. The moment I settle there, I'll send for you immediately. She nodded. I know. You believed in me when nobody else did. Because I know the kind of man you are. Obinna's eyes became emotional again. If I become successful there. When? She corrected gently. He smiled faintly. When I become successful there, I'll spend the rest of my life making you happy. Chidinma rested her head softly against his shoulder. At that exact moment, neither of them realized that inside her womb, a tiny heartbeat had already begun forming quietly. A new life, a new beginning, and a storm neither of them saw coming. The morning Obinna was supposed to travel arrived too quickly. Before sunrise, Chidinma was already awake, sitting quietly on the edge of their mattress while watching her husband prepare for the journey that could change their lives forever. The room felt strangely emotional that morning. Their small apartment, which had once felt suffocating because of poverty, suddenly became precious to both of them. Every crack on the wall, every old piece of furniture, every shared memory inside that room now carried meaning. Obinna zipped up his travel bag slowly while Chidinma folded the last shirt carefully and placed it inside. Neither of them wanted to talk too much, because once they did, the reality of separation would become too painful. "You packed your documents?" she asked softly. Obinna nodded. "Yes." "Passport?" "Yes." "Your certificates?" He smiled faintly. "Yes, madam." That made her laugh quietly. For a brief moment, things felt normal again. Then silence returned. Obinna stopped what he was doing and looked at her carefully. "You'll call me every day?" "If network allows," she replied jokingly. "I'm serious." "So am I." He walked toward her slowly and held her hands. "Once I settle down there, I'll send for you immediately." "I know. You believe me?" "With my whole heart." His eyes softened. Sometimes Chidinma's faith in him scared him a little because he feared disappointing her. But it also gave him strength. After leaving the apartment, they boarded a bus heading toward the airport in Lagos. The journey was long and tiring, but Chidinma barely noticed the discomfort. Her mind was filled with prayers. She stared outside the bus window silently while holding Obinna's hand tightly. At some point during the trip, Obinna rested his head gently against the seat and closed his eyes. "What are you thinking?" she asked quietly. He smiled weakly without opening his eyes. "I'm imagining the day I'll buy you your dream house." Chidinma chuckled softly. "I don't need a dream house. You deserve one. I just want peace." Obinna opened his eyes slowly and looked at her. "You'll have both." Hours later, after arriving in Lagos, Obinna made one final decision before his flight. He did not want Chidinma staying alone in Enugu while he was abroad, especially with their rent issues and financial struggles. So he decided to take her to his family house in the village temporarily until he settled properly in America. At first, Chidinma hesitated. She had never been fully comfortable around some of Obinna's relatives. His mother, Mama Uche, could be difficult sometimes, and his younger sisters, Adiz and Ifeoma, often behaved strangely toward her. Still, she agreed because she did not want to stress Obinna further. By evening, they arrived at the family compound. The house stood large and old-fashioned, surrounded by dusty ground and noisy chickens running around freely. Children from neighboring compounds played nearby while women sat outside discussing village gossip. The moment Mama Uche saw Obinna carrying luggage, excitement spread across her face immediately. "My son!" She rushed forward dramatically and hugged him tightly. "You're finally traveling abroad." Neighbors nearby immediately gathered around curiously. "America! Ah! Obinna has made it." People began congratulating him loudly. Some shook his hands repeatedly. Others praised his destiny. Suddenly, Obinna was no longer the unemployed man people ignored before. Now he was the son traveling to America. Chidinma noticed the difference immediately. Mama Uche finally turned toward her with a forced smile. "Chidinma, welcome." "Thank you, Mama." "Don't worry," the older woman continued loudly so others could hear. "While Obinna is away, you are safe here." Chidinma smiled politely, but something about the woman's tone felt unnatural. Still, she ignored the feeling. Inside the house, preparations quickly began for Obinna's departure the next morning. Neighbors visited non-stop. Relatives came offering advice about America despite never leaving Nigeria themselves. "Don't forget us when you become rich. Bring iPhones for everybody. Marry an American woman too." Everyone laughed loudly at that last comment except Chidinma. Obinna immediately pulled her closer protectively. "I already have my wife," he said firmly. That response pleased Chidinma more than she expected. Later that night, after most visitors left, Obina sat outside alone with Chidinma beneath the moonlight. The village was quieter now. Only distant sounds of insects and occasional barking dogs filled the night air. Obina held her hands tightly. I hate leaving you. You're not abandoning me. It still feels wrong. She leaned gently against his shoulder. Go and succeed for us. He sighed deeply. My mother can be difficult sometimes. Chidinma smiled faintly. I'll manage. If anybody disrespects you. Obina. He paused. You need peace of mind where you're going. He looked at her carefully. You always carry everybody's burden except your own. Because you're my husband. Emotion filled his chest again. That woman loved him beyond words. The next morning came painfully fast. At the airport, Chidinma struggled to hold back tears, while Obina prepared to enter the departure terminal. He hugged her tightly for a long moment. I'll call immediately I land. Okay. And don't stress yourself too much. She nodded. I love you. I love you too. When Obina finally disappeared into the crowd, Chidinma stood there for several seconds staring after him. A strange emptiness settled inside her chest. For the first time since their marriage, they were truly apart. Back at the village house, things remained peaceful for only 2 days. On the third day, the atmosphere changed. That morning, Chidinma woke up around 5 a.m. and hurried toward the kitchen to help prepare breakfast. But before she could even greet anyone properly, Mama Uche frowned at her. So you're just waking up? Chidinma blinked in confusion. Mama, it's still early. The older woman hissed loudly. In this house, women wake before dawn. I'm sorry. You young girls of nowadays are too lazy. Chidinma quietly apologized again, even though she had actually woken early. She ignored the insult and continued helping in the kitchen. But throughout that day, more strange comments followed. Adiz mocked the way she swept the compound. Ifioma complained that the soup contained too much salt even though she had cooked it herself. At first, Chidinma told herself they were simply adjusting. But within 1 week, the truth became obvious. The kindness they showed while Obina was around had completely disappeared. One afternoon, Mama Uche called out sharply from the sitting room. Chidinma. Yes, Mama? Come and wash these clothes. Chidinma looked at the huge pile of dirty clothes beside the woman. All of them. Mama Uche glared at her immediately. You have a problem with it? No, Mama. Then stop standing there. From that day onward, Chidinma became the unofficial servant of the house. Every morning she swept the massive compound alone, fetched water, cooked for everyone, washed clothes, cleaned plates, yet nobody appreciated her efforts. Instead, they complained constantly. She's too slow. She doesn't know how to cook properly. Obina spoiled her too much. The insults became daily routine. Still, Chidinma endured quietly, because she loved her husband deeply. Every night, Obina called from America. At first, hearing his voice brought her comfort. My love, he would say excitedly. America is cold, oh. She laughed softly. How was your journey? Stressful. But I'm fine now. Then he began telling her unbelievable things. The company apartment, the huge roads, the organized environment, the luxurious office. Sometimes Chidinma struggled imagining it all. One evening, Obina sounded especially excited. Chi, you won't believe this. What happened? They assigned an official car to me today. What? Yes. She laughed happily. See your life. I'm serious. A real company car. Joy filled her heart hearing him happy again. For the first time in months, hope sounded alive in his voice. But unknown to Obina, the atmosphere around Chidinma was worsening daily. One afternoon, while she was washing plates outside, she overheard Adiz speaking with a neighbor. That woman has stayed in our family for years without a child. The neighbor replied. Maybe she's barren. They both laughed quietly. Chidinma froze. The words pierced her deeply. Her marriage without children had already been painful enough. Hearing others mock her openly made it worse. That night, while speaking with Obinna on the phone, she almost told him everything. Almost. But when she heard how happy he sounded discussing his new job orientation and future plans, she changed her mind. He needed peace, not more stress. So she smiled through the pain. "I'm fine," she lied gently. Days later, Obinna called again with bigger news. "Chidinma." "Yes. My first salary entered." Her eyes widened immediately. "Already?" "Yes." She could hear excitement exploding through his voice. "The amount is unbelievable." Tears gathered in her eyes instantly. After all the suffering, after all the hunger, after all the shame, things were finally changing. "I'm sending money home immediately," he continued proudly. "You people should buy foodstuffs and anything needed." Chidinma smiled happily. "Thank you." But she never received a single naira. The money entered Mama Uche's account instead. And from that very moment, greed quietly entered the family. That evening, Chidinma noticed something strange. Mama Uche returned from the bank smiling unusually hard. Adiz and Ifioma also looked excited. Meanwhile, no food was bought for the house. Nothing changed for Chidinma. The next morning, she finally asked carefully, "Mama, Obinna said he sent money?" Mama Uche's expression changed instantly. "So? I thought maybe." "You thought maybe what?" Chidinma lowered her eyes quickly. "Nothing." The older woman hissed loudly. "Do you think money grows on trees?" That was the beginning of betrayal, the beginning of cruelty, the beginning of the suffering that would soon destroy Chidinma's life completely. 3 months after Obinna traveled to America, Chidinma's body began changing in ways she could no longer ignore. First, she thought it was simply stress. Her appetite had reduced drastically because of constant tension inside the house. She felt tired almost every day from endless chores, and sometimes dizziness came suddenly while she worked under the hot afternoon sun. But slowly, other signs appeared. Her monthly cycle stopped. Certain smells made her nauseous, and every morning, she woke up feeling strangely weak. Still, she kept quiet. Part of her was afraid to hope. For years, people had mocked her childlessness openly. Relatives whispered behind her back during weddings and family gatherings. Some women even advised Obinna privately to marry another wife before it becomes too late. Each comment wounded her deeply, though she rarely showed it. There were nights she cried silently while Obinna slept beside her, praying desperately for a child. But through it all, Obinna never blamed her. Not once. Whenever she apologized tearfully, he would wipe her face gently and say, "You are enough for me." Those words had carried her through many painful moments. Now, sitting alone beside the outdoor kitchen one evening, Chidinma carefully placed her hand on her stomach. Could it really be possible? A tiny smile slowly appeared on her lips. Then footsteps interrupted her thoughts. "What are you doing there like a statue?" It was Adiz. Chidinma quickly stood up. "Nothing." Adiz rolled her eyes dramatically. "Go and wash the plates before Mama starts shouting again." Chidinma nodded quietly and carried the basin toward the backyard. As she bent down to begin washing, sudden dizziness hit her hard. The plates slipped from her hand and crashed loudly to the ground. Immediately, Adiz screamed from inside the house. "Jesus! This woman has broken the plates." Mama Uche stormed outside angrily. "What happened?" "She dropped them carelessly," Adiz snapped. Chidinma held her head weakly. "I'm sorry. I suddenly felt dizzy." Mama Uche hissed loudly. "Every time it's one excuse after another. I'm not feeling too strong." The older woman folded her arms. "Did anybody force you to come here?" Chidinma lowered her eyes silently. No answer would satisfy the woman anyway. That night, the dizziness became worse. Even standing up from the mattress felt difficult. Her body burned with weakness. By morning, While sweeping the compound, her vision suddenly blurred completely. The broom slipped from her hand, and before she realized what was happening, everything went dark. When Chidinma opened her eyes again, she found herself lying on a hospital bed inside a small local clinic. A ceiling fan rotated lazily above her. The sharp smell of medicine filled the air. Confused, she tried sitting up slowly. "Easy," a nurse said gently beside her. "What happened?" "You fainted outside." Chidinma blinked weakly. Then she noticed an elderly woman sitting nearby. It was their neighbor, Mama Nkechi. "You scared everybody," the woman said kindly. "I saw you collapse and brought you here." Tears immediately filled Chidinma's eyes. Nobody from Obina's family came. Not even one person. The nurse smiled warmly while checking some papers. "Well," she said cheerfully, "the good news is that both mother and baby are fine." Chidinma froze completely. "Baby?" The nurse laughed softly. "Yes, now. You're pregnant." For several seconds, Chidinma could not speak. The words echoed inside her head repeatedly. Pregnant, pregnant, pregnant. Her hands slowly moved toward her stomach. Then suddenly tears poured from her eyes uncontrollably. Years of pain, years of waiting, years of humiliation. And now this miracle had finally arrived. Mama Nkechi smiled warmly. "See why God's timing is the best." Chidinma covered her mouth as sobs escaped her chest. The nurse assumed they were tears of joy, but those tears carried far more emotions than anybody in that room could understand. Relief, gratitude, disbelief, fear. Above all, she wished Obina was there. "He's going to be so happy," she whispered emotionally. The nurse handed her a small hospital card. "You'll need proper rest now. No too much stress." At those words, Chidinma almost laughed bitterly. Rest? Inside that house? Impossible. Still, despite everything, happiness filled her heart as she walked slowly back toward the compound later that afternoon. For the first time in many months, genuine excitement burned inside her chest. She could already imagine Obina's reaction. He would cry. She knew he would. He loved children deeply, though he rarely admitted how much their childlessness affected him too. As she entered the compound, Adiz looked up from where she was peeling yam. "So you're finally back." Chidinma smiled faintly. "I went to the clinic." Mama Uche emerged from inside immediately. "Clinic? For what?" Chidinma hesitated shyly. Then softly, she said, "I'm pregnant." Silence. Complete silence. For a second, she expected surprise. Maybe joy. Maybe congratulations. Instead, Mama Uche's face darkened instantly. "What did you say?" "I'm pregnant." Adiz burst into laughter immediately. "What kind of joke is this?" "It's true," Chidinma replied quietly. Mama Uche stepped closer slowly. "Who is responsible?" Chidinma blinked in shock. "Mama, you heard me." The older woman's voice became cold and sharp. "My son traveled months ago." "Yes, but before he traveled." "Shut up." The shout startled her badly. "You think we are fools?" Tears gathered instantly in Chidinma's eyes. "Mama, I would never cheat on Obina." Adiz scoffed loudly. "Then explain the pregnancy." "The baby is his." "Liar." Chidinma felt her chest tighten painfully. "I swear." "Don't swear in this house," Mama Uche thundered. Neighbors nearby slowly began paying attention to the argument. Embarrassment burned through Chidinma's body. The older woman pointed angrily at her stomach. "You shameless girl. My son travels abroad and suddenly you become pregnant." "Mama, please." "Who is the man?" "There's no other man." But nobody listened. By evening, the entire compound had heard the story. And as usual, gossip spread quickly. "She got pregnant after her husband traveled." Maybe she has been pretending all along." Chidinma cried quietly into her pillow that night. Not because strangers were talking, but because the people who should have protected her were destroying her instead. Still, she refused to let bitterness poison her joy completely. There was a baby inside her now, a child she had prayed for endlessly. She had to stay strong. The next day, she waited anxiously for Obinna's usual phone call. Finally, the phone rang. Her heart jumped immediately, but before she could reach it, Mama Uche answered first. "Yes, my son." Chidinma moved closer excitedly. She wanted to tell him herself. But Mama Uche suddenly stood up and walked outside with the phone. Chidinma followed nervously. "Mama, please let me speak with him." The woman ignored her completely. Instead, she continued speaking sweetly into the phone. "Yes, she's fine." Chidinma's frustration grew. "Mama, please." The older woman covered the phone speaker and glared at her. "Can't you see I'm talking?" Then she returned to the call. "Yes, she went to fetch water." Chidinma froze. "What? She'll call you later." Mama Uche continued smoothly before ending the call entirely. Chidinma stared at her in disbelief. "Mama, why did you lie?" The woman faced her slowly. "You think you'll destroy my son's life with your stupidity?" Tears filled Chidinma's eyes instantly. "This baby is his child. We'll see." "Mama, please let me explain to him." "And tell him what?" "That you suddenly became pregnant after he left." Frustration and helplessness crashed over Chidinma at once. She had no personal phone and no money, and no way to contact her husband directly. Mama Uche controlled everything. Days passed, then weeks. The pregnancy slowly became visible. But instead of receiving care, Chidinma's suffering increased. Mama Uche deliberately gave her more chores. She fetched heavy water buckets despite her condition, washed massive piles of clothes, cooked for everybody while barely eating enough herself. One hot afternoon, while scrubbing the bathroom floor painfully, Ifeoma walked in and smirked. "So the pregnancy is still there?" Chidinma ignored her quietly. Ifeoma continued mockingly. "You better pray the child resembles Obinna." That statement pierced her deeply. Sometimes the emotional pain hurt worse than physical exhaustion. At night, she often lay awake rubbing her stomach gently while whispering to the baby. "Your father loves you already," she would say softly through tears. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in America, Obinna lived in complete ignorance. His life had transformed rapidly. The company apartment assigned to him was beautiful. Modern furniture, steady electricity, air conditioning. A kitchen larger than their entire apartment back in Nigeria. Sometimes he stood inside the luxurious space feeling overwhelmed. Only months earlier, he had struggled to afford food. Now his annual salary alone could change entire generations of his family. His supervisors admired his intelligence and work ethic quickly. Within a short time, they entrusted him with bigger responsibilities. Every payday, Obinna sent large amounts of money home immediately. "Take care of Chidinma," he always reminded his mother. "Of course," Mama Uche replied sweetly each time. "She's doing very well." Sometimes he requested to speak with his wife directly, but there was always an excuse. "She's sleeping. She went to church. She's in the market." At first, Obinna believed everything. After all, why would his own mother lie? Still, something slowly began bothering him. Chidinma herself never sounded the same anymore during the few moments he occasionally managed to speak with her. Her voice sounded tired, weak, almost afraid. One evening during a brief call, he frowned slightly. "Chi, are you okay?" "Yes," she answered quickly. "You sound strange." "I'm just tired." "You're working too much?" "No." "Is my mother treating you well?" Pause followed. Then softly, she said, "Yes." But something about that answer unsettled him deeply. Before he could ask further questions, Mama Uche suddenly interrupted and collected the phone. "My son, network is disturbing." The call ended immediately afterward. Obinna stared at his phone uneasily. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. Back in Nigeria, Chidinma sat alone behind the house later that same night, crying quietly under the dark sky. Her hands rested gently on her growing stomach. For the first time since discovering the pregnancy, fear slowly overshadowed her happiness. Because deep down, she was beginning to realize that the people around her were no longer simply unkind. They were dangerous. As Chidinma's pregnancy grew, so did the cruelty inside Obinna's family house. What had once been insults and cold treatment slowly transformed into deliberate suffering. Every morning before sunrise, Mama Uche banged loudly on Chidinma's door. Wake up! Even at 5 months pregnant, she was still expected to sweep the massive compound, fetch water from a distant borehole, wash heavy clothes, and cook for everybody in the house. Meanwhile, Adiz and Ifeoma spent most of their time pressing phones, gossiping with friends, or visiting neighbors. Yet somehow, Chidinma remained the lazy one in their eyes. One cold morning, Chidinma struggled to lift a large bucket of water onto her head. Pain shot through her lower back immediately. She winced quietly. Her stomach had become heavier now, making simple tasks difficult. Still, she forced herself to continue because any complaint usually ended badly. As she carefully walked toward the house, Adiz looked at her and hissed. See how she's walking slowly like a queen. Chidinma said nothing. If you're tired, remove the pregnancy, Adiz added wickedly. That statement pierced deeply, but Chidinma kept walking silently. She had learned something important in that house. Silence sometimes protected her more than words. Later that afternoon, while preparing soup in the kitchen, sudden hunger hit her so hard that her hands began shaking. She had eaten almost nothing since the previous day. Only a small cup of watery pap in the morning. The smell of the soup boiling on fire made her stomach tighten painfully. Carefully, she looked around. Nobody was inside the kitchen. Slowly, she picked up a spoon and tasted a tiny amount of soup. Immediately, a sharp voice exploded behind her. Thief! Chidinma jumped in fear. Mama Uche stood at the doorway glaring furiously. I was only tasting the salt, Chidinma explained quickly. Liar! Mama, I swear. So now you steal food meant for the family? Chidinma's eyes filled instantly. I'm hungry. The older woman laughed mockingly. And whose problem is that? For several seconds, Chidinma could not speak. Not because she lacked words, but because the cruelty shocked her every single time. This woman was her husband's mother. How could another woman treat a pregnant person this way? That evening during dinner, everybody ate normally at the dining table while Chidinma served them quietly. Nobody invited her to sit. Nobody offered her food. After serving the last plate, she stood there uncertainly. Mama Uche looked up coldly. Why are you standing there? I haven't eaten. So? The room fell silent. Adiz smirked openly. There's no food remaining. Chidinma looked toward the pot. There was still food inside. She could see it clearly. But before she could speak, Mama Uche snapped again. If you're done serving us, go to your room. Tears burned her eyes immediately. Still, she obeyed quietly. That night, hunger tormented her terribly. She lay awake on the thin mattress holding her stomach while the baby moved gently inside her. I'm sorry, she whispered tearfully to her unborn child. Her body desperately needed proper food now, but survival inside that house had become almost impossible. The next morning, she woke up feeling extremely weak. As she swept the compound, black spots danced across her vision repeatedly. Even breathing felt difficult. One elderly neighbor passing by stopped suddenly. Chidinma? She forced a weak smile. Good morning, Mama. The woman frowned deeply. You don't look well. I'm okay. The older woman glanced toward her stomach. Have you eaten today? Chidinma hesitated. That silence alone answered the question. The woman looked around carefully before quietly pressing 2 pieces of bread into Chidinma's hand. Take this. Emotion filled Chidinma's eyes instantly. Thank you. Eat quickly before somebody sees you. The moment the woman left, Chidinma hurried behind the house and ate the bread desperately. Tears rolled down her face while chewing. Not because of the bread itself, but because strangers showed her more kindness than family. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in America, Obina's life continued improving rapidly. Every week brought new blessings. His supervisors praised his work constantly. He received bonuses, extra allowances, even investment opportunities. One Friday evening, he stood inside his luxurious apartment staring out through the massive glass windows overlooking the city lights. Sometimes the life still felt unreal. Only months earlier, he had been sitting hopelessly inside a leaking apartment in Nigeria. Now he drove expensive company vehicles and attended meetings with wealthy executives. Yet despite the success surrounding him, one thing kept bothering him constantly. Chidinma. Something about her recent behavior during phone calls felt wrong. She sounded weaker each time, less cheerful, almost distant. At first, he assumed she simply missed him, but the feeling in his chest kept growing stronger. One night, he called unexpectedly earlier than usual. Mama Uche answered immediately. My son. Mama, where's Chidinma? She's sleeping. At this hour? She wasn't feeling strong. Obina frowned instantly. What happened? Nothing serious. Let me speak with her. Silence briefly followed. Then Mama Uche laughed awkwardly. She already slept deeply. Obina looked at the phone suspiciously. For the first time, doubt entered his mind. Still, he pushed it aside. Why would his mother lie? Back in Nigeria, Chidinma sat quietly outside under the dark sky while rubbing her stomach gently. She had not spoken properly with Obina in almost 2 weeks. Every single attempt failed. Sometimes Mama Uche refused to call her when Obina phoned. Other times she ended conversations quickly before Chidinma could say much. The isolation was becoming unbearable. One evening, while washing clothes painfully beside the well, Ifeoma walked over holding a bottle of malt drink. She opened it slowly and drank in front of Chidinma deliberately. The cold drink glistened temptingly under the afternoon sun. Chidinma swallowed hard unconsciously. She was thirsty, very thirsty. Ifeoma noticed immediately and smirked. Do you want some? Chidinma looked away quietly. No. Good. Because I wasn't planning to give you. She walked away laughing. Chidinma closed her eyes tightly. The humiliation was endless. A few days later, Obina sent another large amount of money home. This time, he specifically instructed his mother. Please buy fruits and healthy food for Chidinma. She needs to stay strong. Mama Uche smiled sweetly over the phone. Don't worry. We are taking care of her very well. That same evening, several cartons of expensive groceries arrived at the compound. Rice, chicken, drinks, snacks, imported food items. The family celebrated excitedly, but none of it reached Chidinma. Mama Uche locked most of the groceries inside her bedroom. That night during dinner, delicious smells filled the entire house. Fried chicken, jollof rice, fresh fish stew. Chidinma's stomach cramped painfully from hunger. The baby kicked repeatedly inside her womb as if reacting to the smell too. She sat quietly in one corner while the others ate happily. Laughter filled the room. Obina is really making money now. America has changed our lives. Adiz grabbed another piece of chicken greedily. We should renovate this house soon. Meanwhile, Chidinma drank only water. Nobody cared. Later that night, extreme hunger forced her to enter the kitchen quietly after everyone slept. The house remained silent except for the sound of crickets outside. Carefully, she opened one pot. Rice remained inside. Not much, just enough for one person. Tears gathered instantly in her eyes. Slowly, she reached for a spoon. But before she could touch the food, the kitchen light suddenly came on. Mama Uche stood there staring coldly. For a second, nobody moved. Then the older woman laughed bitterly. So it's true. Chidinma's breathing quickened nervously. Mama, you sneak around at night stealing food? I was hungry. Hunger won't kill you. But the baby. What baby? Mama Uche snapped harshly. That pregnancy means nothing to me. Those words shattered something inside Chidinma completely. Her lips trembled. Mama, please. Get out of this kitchen. Tears streamed down Chidinma's face immediately. I haven't eaten since yesterday. And I feel weak. Mama Uche stepped closer with hard eyes. You should have thought about that before disgracing this family. I didn't disgrace anybody. The words escaped before Chidinma could stop herself. Silence filled the kitchen instantly. Mama Uche's expression darkened dangerously. What did you say? Chidinma realized her mistake immediately. I'm sorry. But the older woman slapped her hard across the face. The force nearly knocked her down. You dare raise your voice at me? Chidinma held her cheek in shock. Tears blurred her vision instantly. I'm sorry. Get out. Terrified, Chidinma stumbled back toward her room while crying quietly. Once inside, she locked the door and collapsed onto the mattress. For several minutes, she simply sobbed into her pillow. Not loudly, just broken, exhausted tears from someone slowly losing strength. Her stomach tightened painfully again. Immediately, fear rushed through her. No, no, no. She rubbed her belly gently. Please be okay. Eventually, the pain eased slightly, but sleep never came. By morning, her body felt worse. Her lips looked dry, her face thinner, her eyes sunken from stress and hunger. Even Mama Nkechi, the elderly neighbor, gasped when she saw her. Jesus Christ, Chidinma, I'm fine. No, you are not. The woman lowered her voice carefully. Are they feeding you at all? Tears instantly gathered in Chidinma's eyes. That alone answered the question. Mama Nkechi looked furious. This is evil. She quickly disappeared into her own compound and returned minutes later with a small bowl of soup and gari. Eat now. Chidinma nearly cried from gratitude. Thank you. The older woman shook her head sadly. You cannot continue like this, especially in your condition. As Chidinma ate slowly with trembling hands, Mama Nkechi watched her with deep concern. You need to tell your husband. At those words, fresh tears rolled down Chidinma's cheeks. I can't reach him properly. What do you mean? His mother controls everything. The older woman's expression darkened immediately. Even she now understood something dangerous was happening inside that house. Meanwhile, across the ocean, Obinna sat inside his office staring distractedly at his laptop screen. His co-workers laughed nearby during lunch break, but his mind remained elsewhere. Something was wrong. He could feel it strongly now. He picked up his phone again and dialed home. This time, Chidinma answered before anybody else could collect the phone. Obinna! Relief flooded both of them instantly. My God! He breathed. Finally! Tears immediately gathered in Chidinma's eyes, hearing his voice clearly after so long. How are you? He asked quickly. Before she could answer properly, Mama Uche suddenly appeared beside her. Give me the phone. Chidinma tightened her grip desperately. Mama, please. Give me that phone. Obinna heard the struggle immediately. Chi? What's happening? Fear spread through Chidinma instantly. Should she tell him? Should she finally expose everything? Her lips parted, but Mama Uche forcefully snatched the phone away. My son! The older woman said sweetly, pretending nothing happened. Network disturbance. Obinna stood up immediately inside his office. Mama, why was Chidinma crying? She's emotional because of pregnancy hormones. Pregnancy. The word shocked him completely. What? Yes, now, Mama Uche replied casually. Didn't she tell you? For several seconds, Obinna forgot how to breathe. Pregnant? Chidinma was pregnant? Emotion exploded inside his chest instantly. Joy, shock, disbelief. I'm going to be a father? Mama Uche forced a fake laugh. Yes. Obinna smiled so hard tears entered his eyes immediately. But while happiness consumed him, back in Nigeria, Chidinma sat silently on the floor outside the room. Hungry, weak, and crying quietly, because she knew the worst part of her suffering had only just begun. After Obinna discovered that Chidinma was pregnant, his happiness in America became overwhelming. For the first time in years, he felt completely fulfilled. Everywhere he went, he smiled like a man carrying a beautiful secret. At work, his colleagues noticed the sudden change immediately. "You look too happy today," one of them joked during lunch break. Obinna laughed proudly. "I'm going to be a father." The men congratulated him warmly. Some shook his hands. Others teased him playfully about sleepless nights and diapers. But deep inside, Obinna felt emotional beyond words. Many nights in Nigeria, he and Chidinma had prayed together for this exact miracle. Now it was finally happening, and he could not wait to hold his child someday. That evening, after work, Obinna entered one of the biggest shopping malls he had ever seen. The bright lights, shiny floors, and luxurious stores still amazed him sometimes. Slowly, he walked into a baby clothing store. Tiny clothes filled the shelves. Small shoes, soft blankets, baby bottles. Obinna smiled helplessly. Everything looked beautiful. He picked up a tiny blue baby outfit and stared at it for several seconds. Then he laughed quietly to himself. What if it's a girl? In the end, he bought both blue and pink clothes, just in case. He also bought expensive perfumes, handbags, jewelry, and new phones for his mother and sisters back home. Even after their occasional strange behavior during calls, he still loved them deeply. After all, they were family, and family to Obinna meant loyalty. Little did he know that the people he trusted most were slowly destroying his wife. Back in Nigeria, Chidinma's suffering had reached terrifying levels. At 6 months pregnant, her body had become weak from constant starvation and stress. Her once glowing skin looked dull now. Her cheeks had sunk inward slightly. Even her clothes hung loosely around her shrinking frame. Yet every morning, Mama Uche still woke her before dawn. Go and fetch water. Wash those clothes. Clean the kitchen properly. The older woman behaved as if Chidinma's pregnancy did not exist at all. Sometimes the workload became so overwhelming that Chidinma secretly cried while working. Still, she endured quietly, because she had nowhere else to go. One hot afternoon, while sweeping the compound under the burning sun, sudden pain tightened across her lower stomach. She gasped softly and leaned against the wall immediately. Sweat covered her face. The baby kicked weakly inside her. Fear rushed through her chest instantly. Please, not now. Before she could recover, Adiz stepped outside and frowned. Why did you stop sweeping? I'm feeling pain. Adiz rolled her eyes dramatically. Pregnancy is not sickness. Chidinma lowered her eyes silently. That sentence again. Nobody cared. Nobody showed concern. To them, she was simply a burden living inside the house. That evening, Mama Nkechi secretly called her over through the fence. Come. Chidinma walked over slowly. The older woman handed her a nylon bag containing bread, beans, and fruits. Tears entered Chidinma's eyes immediately. Mama, eat properly before you kill yourself and that baby. Emotion clogged Chidinma's throat. Thank you. Mama Nkechi sighed sadly. I still don't understand how human beings can be this wicked. Neither did Chidinma. Sometimes at night, she genuinely wondered if her suffering was punishment from God for something she did not remember. But then she would place her hand gently over her stomach and whisper, Your father is coming back for us. That hope was the only thing keeping her alive. Meanwhile, in America, Obinna continued sending more money home every month. Huge amounts. enough to feed the entire family comfortably for years. Whenever he called, his mother always sounded cheerful. "Your wife is fine. She's eating very well. The pregnancy is growing perfectly." Sometimes Obinna asked to speak directly with Chidinma, and occasionally they finally allowed it briefly. But the conversations were always controlled carefully. "How are you feeling?" he asked one night. "I'm okay," Chidinma answered softly. "You sound tired. Just small stress. Please rest more." She almost laughed bitterly. "Rest? Inside that house? Impossible." "I miss you," Obinna continued emotionally. Tears gathered instantly in her eyes. "I miss you too. I'm already making plans to bring you over here after delivery." Hope flickered weakly inside her chest. "You mean it?" "Of course." He smiled warmly over the phone. "You won't believe the kind of house they gave me here." She smiled faintly. "I'm happy for you. You and our baby will live like royalty." At those words, fresh tears rolled silently down her cheeks. If only he knew the truth. Before she could speak further, Mama Uche suddenly interrupted again. "My son, she needs rest." The phone disconnected shortly afterward. Chidinma stared at the dark screen helplessly. Every opportunity to tell him the truth vanished before she could gather courage. And now, things inside the house were becoming more dangerous daily. One evening, Mama Uche gathered Adiz and Ifioma privately inside her bedroom. The door remained slightly open. Unknowingly, Chidinma overheard part of the conversation while passing nearby with laundry. "That girl is becoming a problem," Mama Uche whispered. "What do we do?" Adiz asked. "If Obinna comes back and sees her suffering, everything will scatter." Fear tightened inside Chidinma immediately. She stood frozen quietly near the wall. Mama Uche continued speaking bitterly. "My son sends money every month because of that woman and her pregnancy." "So what now?" Ifioma asked. The older woman's voice hardened dangerously. "She must leave this house before Obinna returns." Chidinma's breathing stopped completely. Leave? Where would she go? She moved away quickly before they noticed her listening. That night, sleep refused to come. Fear kept racing through her mind endlessly. Would they really throw her out? No, surely not. Not while she was pregnant. Even Mama Uche could not be that heartless. At least that was what Chidinma desperately wanted to believe. 2 days later, disaster finally came. That afternoon, Chidinma finished washing clothes and entered the kitchen quietly to prepare dinner. The smell of stew filled the room. For once, there was meat inside the pot because Obinna had recently sent another large amount of money. As she stirred the soup gently, hunger twisted painfully inside her stomach again. She had eaten only gari soaked in water that morning. Nothing else. The aroma became unbearable. Carefully, she picked one tiny piece of meat from the pot and quickly swallowed it. At that exact moment, Adiz entered the kitchen. Her eyes widened dramatically. "Mama!" Chidinma froze immediately. "Mama, come and see your daughter-in-law." Footsteps rushed toward the kitchen instantly. Mama Uche stormed inside angrily. "What happened?" "She's stealing meat from the pot." Chidinma panicked immediately. "No, Mama. I only took one piece." "One piece?" Adiz shouted. "Thief! I was hungry." Mama Uche stared at her with pure disgust. "So now you steal food in my house?" Tears entered Chidinma's eyes immediately. "I cook every day without eating properly." "Shut up." The older woman slapped the spoon from her hand violently. "You useless girl. Mama, please." Before Chidinma could finish speaking, Ifioma joined the shouting too. "She has always been a thief. Since Obinna traveled, she has shown her true colors." The noise quickly attracted neighbors outside. Humiliation burned through Chidinma's body. "I didn't steal anything." "You're arguing?" Mama Uche yelled furiously. Then suddenly, the older woman pointed toward the door. Pack your things and leave my house." The world seemed to stop. Chidinma blinked slowly. "Mama, you heard me." Fear crashed into her chest immediately. "Please, where will I go? That is not my problem. I'm pregnant." "And whose pregnancy is that?" The cruel words struck like knives. Tears poured down Chidinma's face instantly. "Mama, please don't do this." But Mama Uche had already made up her mind. Within minutes, Adiz and Ifioma entered Chidinma's room aggressively. They threw her clothes into an old nylon bag carelessly. "Mama, please," Chidinma cried desperately while following them. "Please don't send me away." Nobody listened. Not one person. Even some neighbors watched silently without interfering. Fear and shame swallowed her completely. Her entire life now fit inside one small bag. At 7 months pregnant, homeless, weak, and unwanted. Finally, Mama Uche dragged the bag outside and threw it onto the muddy ground. "Leave before I disgrace you further." Rain clouds gathered heavily above the village already. "Mama, please." But the gate slammed shut directly in her face. Chidinma stood there frozen. Rain began falling slowly, then harder. Within minutes, her clothes became soaked completely. Still, nobody opened the gate again, not even after hearing her crying outside. Eventually, the rain became violent. Thunder roared loudly across the darkening sky. Chidinma picked up her small nylon bag with trembling hands and began walking slowly down the road. No destination, no plan, only pain. Villagers stared at her curiously as she passed. Some whispered, some pitied her silently, others ignored her completely. The muddy road became slippery beneath her weak feet. Her stomach tightened painfully again. She stopped walking briefly and held her belly carefully. "Please stay strong," she whispered tearfully to the baby. Night fell gradually. Cold wind blew across the empty roadside. Finally, exhausted and shivering, Chidinma found a small abandoned shop near the market area. The broken wooden structure offered slight protection from the rain. Slowly, she sat on the cold floor and hugged herself tightly. Water dripped from her clothes continuously. Hunger burned inside her stomach. Fear crushed her chest. Loneliness surrounded her completely. For the first time since Obinna traveled, hopelessness truly entered her heart. What if something happened to her before he returned? What if she lost the baby? What if nobody ever told him the truth? Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks silently. Then suddenly the baby kicked strongly inside her stomach. Chidinma froze. Slowly, she placed her hand over her belly. Another kick followed. Despite everything, the baby was still fighting. A weak smile appeared through her tears. "You're strong like your father," she whispered softly. Far away in America at that exact moment, Obinna stood inside his beautiful apartment assembling a baby crib he had just purchased online. Excitement filled his face completely. He smiled proudly while imagining his wife and unborn child beside him soon, completely unaware that his pregnant wife was homeless and sleeping alone on a cold floor under the rain. The first night Chidinma slept inside the abandoned roadside shop felt like a nightmare she could not wake up from. Cold wind blew through the broken wooden boards while mosquitoes buzzed endlessly around her. Her wrapper was still damp from the heavy rain earlier, and the cement floor beneath her body felt painfully hard. She curled up quietly in one corner, hugging her stomach protectively. Every few minutes, fear forced her awake again. Stray dogs barked nearby. Drunk men laughed loudly in the distance. Motorcycles occasionally sped past the dark road. Everything felt unsafe. Everything felt frightening. At some point during the night, sharp hunger cramps twisted inside her stomach again. Tears rolled slowly down her face. Not because she was hungry anymore. She had become used to hunger. But because her baby was suffering too. "I'm sorry," she whispered weakly while rubbing her belly gently. The child kicked softly in response. That tiny movement somehow kept her alive emotionally. It reminded her that she was no longer fighting only for herself. Morning finally arrived slowly. Sunlight entered through the broken wooden space above the abandoned shop, revealing just how miserable her condition looked. Her face appeared swollen from crying. Her clothes were dirty and wrinkled, her feet were muddy. For several moments, Chidinma simply sat there staring blankly ahead. She had nowhere to go, no family nearby, no money, and no way to contact Obinna. The realization crushed her heavily. Still, she forced herself to stand up slowly. She could not remain there forever. Outside, the streets had already become busy. Traders arranged goods beside the roadside. Children hurried toward school. Kiki drivers shouted for passengers. Normal life continued around her as if her world had not collapsed overnight. As Chidinma walked slowly through the market road, several people stared openly at her protruding stomach and tired appearance. Some pitied her silently. Others ignored her completely. Around noon, dizziness hit her badly again. Her vision blurred briefly, forcing her to sit beneath a tree near the roadside. She had not eaten since the previous afternoon, and her body was beginning to fail seriously. A woman selling roasted corn nearby watched her carefully for some time before finally walking over. "Are you okay?" Chidinma forced a weak nod. "I'm fine." The woman frowned. "That's not what your face is saying." Embarrassment filled Chidinma instantly. She hated appearing helpless before strangers. The woman looked toward her stomach. "How many months?" "7." The seller sighed deeply and handed her one roasted corn without another word. Chidinma's eyes widened. "I don't have money. Take it." Emotion immediately tightened her throat. "Thank you." The woman nodded gently and returned to her stand. Chidinma ate slowly beneath the tree while tears rolled silently down her cheeks. Kindness from strangers now felt more genuine than love from family. That realization hurt deeply. For the next several days, Chidinma survived like that, moving from one place to another, searching for temporary shelter, begging quietly for food when hunger became unbearable. Sometimes she slept behind churches, other nights under unfinished buildings. Once, a group of drunk boys nearly cornered her near a roadside junction late at night. Fear swallowed her completely. She ran despite the pain shooting through her swollen body until she reached a crowded area. After that incident, terror followed her constantly. Every night became another battle to survive safely. Her body weakened more daily, yet somehow the baby remained strong. Each kick inside her stomach reminded her that she could not give up, no matter how hard things became. Meanwhile, in America, Obinna continued living inside a completely different reality. His success had exploded faster than he ever imagined. Within months, the engineering company promoted him to a higher position because of his intelligence and dedication. His income increased massively. Bonuses arrived frequently. Investment opportunities surrounded him constantly. One Friday evening, he stood inside a luxurious car dealership staring at a black Rolls-Royce with disbelief. The polished body gleamed beautifully beneath the showroom lights. The salesman smiled confidently. "Excellent choice, sir." Obinna shook his head slowly. "Honestly, I still can't believe this is my life." The salesman laughed politely. "You worked for it." But deep down, Obinna knew something else too. None of it would have happened without Chidinma. Without her sacrifices, without her belief in him, without the savings she secretly gathered through suffering. Every success he enjoyed carried her fingerprints. That thought made him love her even more. "She'll like this car," he said softly while imagining her reaction someday. Later that night, he video called his mother again. "Mama, where's Chidinma? I want to see her face." Mama Uche forced a smile quickly. "She's sleeping already." "At this hour?" "She has been feeling tired because of pregnancy." Obinna frowned slightly. "Put her on the phone tomorrow morning then." "Of course." But the next morning came with another excuse. She went for antenatal. Then another day. She's bathing. Then another. She's visiting a neighbor. At first, Obinna ignored the strange pattern. But slowly, suspicion began growing stronger inside him. Something did not feel right. Back in Nigeria, Chidinma's condition became more desperate after 1 week on the streets. Her legs had swollen badly now. Walking long distances became painful. Sometimes contractions frightened her briefly before easing again. One afternoon, while sitting weakly beside a church fence, an elderly woman approached her slowly. The woman carried a basket filled with vegetables. She stopped directly in front of Chidinma. "My daughter." Chidinma looked up weakly. The older woman's eyes softened immediately. "What happened to you?" For some reason, those simple words broke the remaining strength inside Chidinma completely. Tears burst from her eyes instantly. Everything she had endured came crashing out at once. The hunger, the rejection, the loneliness, the fear. She cried openly like a child while the woman listened quietly. After hearing everything, the older woman sighed deeply. Human beings can be wicked. Chidinma wiped her face helplessly. "I don't know where to go anymore." The woman thought silently for a moment. Then finally she spoke. "There's a shelter not too far from here." "A shelter?" "Yes, they help homeless women." Hope flickered weakly inside Chidinma's chest. "Will they accept me?" "They should." The woman helped her stand carefully. "Come, I'll show you." The shelter stood inside an old but clean building near the edge of town. A faded signboard outside read, "Home of Hope Women's Shelter." Chidinma stared at the building nervously while holding her small nylon bag tightly. What if they rejected her too? The elderly woman beside her knocked gently on the gate. Moments later, a middle-aged woman opened it. "Yes," the older woman explained quickly. The shelter worker's face softened immediately as she looked at Chidinma. "Oh dear." For the first time in many weeks, somebody looked at her with genuine compassion instead of judgment. "You can come inside." The moment Chidinma stepped into the shelter compound, relief nearly overwhelmed her. The environment was simple but peaceful. Women sat quietly under trees. Some folded clothes. Others played with children nearby. For the first time since being thrown out, she felt slightly safe. A staff member named Esther led her into a small office. "What's your name?" "Chidinma." "Do you have any relatives we can contact?" Tears entered her eyes again. "No." "Your husband?" "He's in America." The woman looked surprised, then concerned. Carefully, Chidinma explained everything from the beginning. The marriage struggles. Obinna's trip abroad. The pregnancy. The starvation. Being thrown out. By the time she finished speaking, Esther looked heartbroken. "This is terrible." Chidinma lowered her eyes quietly. "I just need somewhere safe until I deliver. You can stay here." Those words nearly shattered her emotionally. "You mean it?" "Yes." Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks immediately. After days of sleeping outside in fear, those simple words sounded like heaven. That evening, they gave her a small bed inside a shared room. Nothing luxurious, just a mattress, a pillow, and a clean blanket. But to Chidinma, it felt like peace. Real peace. For the first time in many days, she slept indoors safely. And before sleeping, she whispered softly through tears, "Thank you, God." Days slowly turned into weeks at the shelter. Life remained difficult, but at least she no longer feared sleeping outside. The shelter women became her new temporary family. Most of them carried painful stories too. Some escaped abusive marriages. Some were abandoned. Some lost everything through tragedy. Listening to them made Chidinma realize suffering existed everywhere. One woman became especially close to her. An elderly widow everybody called Mama Grace. Mama Grace loved sitting outside during evenings while telling stories. One night, while they sat together beneath the fading sunset, the older woman looked at Chidinma carefully. "You still love your husband?" Chidinma smiled weakly. With all my heart. Even after everything? He doesn't know. Mama Grace nodded slowly. That's the painful part. Silence settled briefly. Then the old woman sighed. Sometimes family members destroy good marriages out of greed. Chidinma lowered her eyes sadly. I just want him to know the truth someday. He will. You think so? Mama Grace smiled gently. Truth has a way of surviving. Those words stayed in Chidinma's mind long afterward. Meanwhile, across the ocean, Obinna stood inside the beautifully decorated nursery room he had prepared for his unborn child. Tiny toys lined the shelves. Soft lights glowed warmly across the walls. Baby clothes filled the closet already. He smiled proudly while imagining Chidinma there. But then something strange happened. His smile slowly faded. A sudden uneasy feeling entered his chest again. Strong this time. Very strong. He picked up his phone immediately and dialed home once more. The line rang and rang. Finally, Mama Uche answered. My son. Obinna's voice hardened slightly. I want to speak to Chidinma now. For the first time since traveling abroad. His mother sounded nervous. 9 months after leaving Nigeria, Obinna finally returned home. The moment the airplane touched the runway in Lagos, emotion filled his chest so strongly that he had to close his eyes briefly. He was coming back successful. Not as the unemployed man who left with one old travel bag and borrowed hope, but as a wealthy man with a future bigger than he had ever imagined. Everything about his life had changed. The engineering company in America had transformed him completely. He now owned luxury cars, investments, savings large enough to build mansions. But none of those things mattered more than one thought repeating endlessly inside his mind. I'm going to see Chidinma again. For weeks, he had counted down the days excitedly. He imagined her smile constantly, her laughter, the way she rested her head against his shoulder. And most importantly, he was finally going to see his child. Even thinking about it made him emotional. Inside his luggage were expensive gifts carefully chosen for everyone. Designer bags, perfumes, phones, jewelry. For Chidinma, he bought something even more special. A beautiful diamond necklace he spent hours choosing personally. He imagined placing it around her neck while telling her, You suffered with me. Now it's your turn to enjoy. That thought alone made him smile throughout the journey. Outside the airport, several black luxury SUVs waited for him. The company had arranged transportation because of his growing business status. As Obinna stepped outside wearing an expensive fitted suit, people around the airport stared openly. Confidence surrounded him naturally now. The same man who once trekked under the sun searching desperately for work had returned transformed. But despite the wealth and polished appearance, his heart remained the same. The first thing he wanted was his wife. During the drive toward the village, he kept checking his phone repeatedly. Still no message from Chidinma. That strange feeling returned again. The same uneasiness that had bothered him for months. He tried calling her directly once more. Switched off. Obinna frowned deeply. Why was her number always unreachable now? Maybe network. One of the drivers suggested politely. Maybe, Obinna replied quietly. But deep down something felt wrong. Very wrong. Back at the family compound, panic had already exploded. News of Obinna's arrival spread quickly through the village. Mama Uche moved around the house restlessly while Adiz and Ifeoma looked visibly nervous. What are we going to tell him? Ifeoma whispered fearfully. Mama Uche's face tightened. We stick to one story. But what if he doesn't believe us? He must. Adiz paced anxiously. What if somebody tells him the truth? Mama Uche glared sharply. Nobody will. Still, fear lingered heavily inside the house. Because despite all their wickedness, they understood one dangerous truth. Obinna loved Chidinma deeply. If he discovered everything, there would be consequences. Serious consequences. The compound erupted into celebration the moment Obina's convoy arrived. Neighbors rushed outside excitedly. Children screamed happily while running beside the expensive vehicles. Women whispered in amazement, "See those cars? America changed him completely. Obina has become a big man." As he stepped out wearing dark sunglasses and an expensive wristwatch, cameras from villagers' phones flashed everywhere. Mama Uche forced a dramatic smile and hurried forward emotionally. "My son." She hugged him tightly. "I missed you." Obina smiled warmly and hugged her back respectfully. "I missed you too, Mama." Adiz and Ifioma joined excitedly, pretending happiness. "Welcome back, brother. America fits you oh." Obina laughed lightly, but even while greeting everyone, his eyes kept searching around the compound, looking for only one person. Finally, he asked the question, "Where's Chidinma?" Silence. Very brief, but noticeable. Mama Uche quickly forced another smile. "She's not here." Obina frowned instantly. "What do you mean?" His mother looked away dramatically. "She left." The words hit strangely. Obina blinked slowly. "Left where?" "We don't know." Confusion spread across his face immediately. "What are you talking about?" Adiz stepped forward carefully. "She left the house months ago." Obina stared at them in disbelief. "No, Chidinma wouldn't just leave." Mama Uche sighed heavily like a disappointed victim. "My son, we tried our best." "Tried your best for what?" "She changed after you traveled." Obina's expression hardened slightly. "What does that mean?" The older woman shook her head sadly. "She became disrespectful." "That's impossible." "She stopped listening to anybody." Obina felt irritation rising immediately. "No, you people must be mistaken." But then Ifioma joined the lies too. "She was always leaving the house secretly. She became proud because of the money you were sending. And eventually," Adiz added softly, "she disappeared completely." Obina's chest tightened painfully. "No." The answer came immediately, firmly, because nothing about their story sounded like Chidinma. Nothing. His wife was many things. Patient, loving, quiet, but irresponsible. Never. He removed his sunglasses slowly. "Where exactly did she go?" Mama Uche spread her hands helplessly. "We don't know." "She didn't contact anybody?" "No." "She didn't leave any message?" "No." Obina stared at his mother carefully now. For the first time in his life, something about her behavior felt unnatural. Too rehearsed. Too smooth. "She left while pregnant?" he asked slowly. A brief hesitation flashed across Mama Uche's face. Then she nodded. "Yes." Obina stepped backward slightly. That made even less sense. Chidinma had waited years for that pregnancy. There was no way she would abandon everything willingly. "No," he repeated quietly. The compound became silent. Even neighbors watching nearby sensed the tension. Obina forced himself to calm down. "Maybe something happened." "We told you already," Mama Uche insisted quickly. "She ran away." "With who?" "We don't know." Frustration slowly entered his voice. "How can a pregnant woman disappear and nobody knows anything?" Adiz quickly spoke again. "She started behaving strangely before leaving." "What kind of strange behavior?" "She was always pressing phones secretly." Obina frowned. "What phone?" "She barely even had access to one." Silence again. Tiny mistakes in their story were beginning to show. But emotional exhaustion clouded his thoughts heavily. After 9 months away, jet lag and confusion mixed painfully inside him. Part of him desperately wanted to believe his family, because the alternative, that something terrible happened to Chidinma, frightened him deeply. That evening, despite the celebration organized in his honor, Obina remained disturbed. Villagers crowded the compound. Music played loudly. Food filled long tables outside. Everyone wanted to celebrate the successful son who returned from America rich. But Obinna barely paid attention. Even while people congratulated him and praised his success, his mind remained elsewhere. Where was Chidinma? During the party, several people approached him smiling. Obinna, you've done well. America really favored you. We heard you bought houses there already. He smiled politely but without enthusiasm. Then one elderly man spoke carefully. Your wife didn't come with you? Immediately, silence fell briefly around them. Mama Uche answered before Obinna could speak. She left long ago. The man's expression changed strangely. Shock flickered briefly across his face before he forced an awkward smile. Okay. Then he walked away quickly. Obinna noticed it immediately. Something about that reaction unsettled him badly. Later that night, after most guests left, Obinna entered his old room quietly. Everything looked smaller now compared to the luxurious life he had gotten used to abroad. He sat on the edge of the bed slowly. Then his eyes landed on one thing. A small scarf. Chidinma's scarf. Forgotten in one corner of the room. He picked it up carefully. And suddenly memories crashed over him painfully. Her laughter. Her prayers beside him. The nights they slept hungry together. Emotion tightened inside his chest. No matter what anybody said, something was wrong. He picked up his phone immediately and dialed her number again. Still switched off. Frustrated, he stood up and walked toward his mother's room. Mama! She looked up quickly. Yes, I want the truth. Fear flashed briefly through her eyes before disappearing again. What truth? What exactly happened to my wife? Mama Uche sighed dramatically. My son, why are you stressing yourself? Because your story doesn't make sense. She abandoned this family. No. The firmness in his voice surprised even him. She wouldn't do that. His mother's face hardened slightly. You think I'm lying? Obinna hesitated. That question carried dangerous weight in African families. Accusing one's mother directly felt almost forbidden. Still deep down, doubt had already entered his heart. I'm just confused, he said carefully. Mama Uche quickly softened her voice again. She disappointed all of us. She loved me. And maybe she stopped. Obinna looked away immediately. Those words hurt more than he expected. Could Chidinma really stop loving him? No, impossible. Not after everything they survived together. Still, uncertainty slowly poisoned his mind. Because despite his doubts, he had no proof. No evidence. No idea where she was. That night, sleep refused to come. Obinna lay awake staring at the ceiling while painful thoughts tormented him endlessly. Why didn't she contact him? Why leave while pregnant? Why disappear completely? Nothing added up. Around midnight, he stood up frustrated and walked outside. The village remained quiet now. Only crickets and distant barking dogs filled the darkness. As he stood alone beneath the night sky, memories of Chidinma overwhelmed him again. Then suddenly, he remembered something. Mama Nkechi, the elderly neighbor who had always been kind to Chidinma. Immediately, Obinna decided he would speak to her the next morning. Maybe she knew something. Meanwhile, inside the women's shelter across town, Chidinma sat quietly on her small bed, rubbing her swollen stomach gently. She was now heavily pregnant. Almost due. Life at the shelter remained difficult but peaceful compared to the horror she escaped. At least nobody insulted her there. Nobody starved her intentionally. Nobody treated her like dirt. Still, loneliness consumed her constantly. Every night, she wondered the same painful thing. Has Obinna forgotten me? She missed him terribly. Missed his voice, his touch, his kindness. Sometimes she imagined him returning home and discovering the truth immediately. Other times fear whispered something worse. What if he believed his family instead? That thought terrified her deeply, because lies repeated long enough sometimes sounded real. Mama Grace entered the room slowly that night and sat beside her. "You're awake." Chidinma nodded quietly. "I can't sleep." The older woman smiled gently. "You're thinking about your husband again." Tears entered Chidinma's eyes instantly. "I just want him to know the truth." Mama Grace held her hand softly. "He will." "You really believe that?" "Yes." "How?" The old woman smiled mysteriously. "Because God does not sleep forever." At that exact moment, miles away inside the village compound, Obinna stood near the window of his room staring into darkness with growing suspicion. For the first time since returning home, he was beginning to realize that somebody had lied to him. The next morning, Obinna woke up with one decision already made in his mind. He was going to find out the truth himself, no matter what anybody said, no matter who became offended. As sunlight entered through the curtains of his old room, he sat quietly on the bed for several moments, staring at Chidinma's forgotten scarf still resting beside him. His chest tightened painfully again. He picked it up slowly and held it tightly. The soft fabric still carried faint traces of her perfume. Suddenly, memories flooded his mind with brutal clarity. Chidinma standing beside him while frying akara before sunrise. Chidinma secretly saving money for his visa. Chidinma comforting him when he felt like failure. That woman had suffered too much with him. Would she truly abandon him now that life finally became better? No. The answer inside his heart remained firm. Never. A knock interrupted his thoughts. "Obinna?" His mother called from outside gently. "Breakfast is ready." Her voice sounded unusually careful now. Obinna inhaled deeply before standing up. "I'm coming." Inside the dining room, Mama Uche and his sisters behaved strangely cheerful. Too cheerful. Adiz smiled quickly. "Brother, you barely ate anything yesterday. You should relax now. You're finally home." Obinna sat quietly without responding immediately. The food before him looked rich and expensive. Fried plantain, egg sauce, tea, bread. Yet all he could think about was one painful question. Had Chidinma eaten like this even once during her pregnancy? The thought unsettled him badly. Mama Uche cleared her throat carefully. "My son, you shouldn't stress yourself too much about that girl." Obinna looked up slowly. That girl. She already made her choice. Something about the disrespect in her tone irritated him instantly. "That girl is my wife." Silence briefly entered the room. Then Ifioma spoke softly. "Brother, sometimes women change." Obinna's jaw tightened. "Chidinma isn't sometimes women." Nobody responded. The atmosphere became uncomfortable immediately. After a few minutes, Obinna stood up abruptly. "Aren't you eating?" Mama Uche asked quickly. "I'm going out." "Where?" "To clear my head." But that was not the truth. His real destination was Mama Nkechi's house. The elderly woman looked shocked when she saw Obinna standing outside her gate. "Obinna!" He smiled respectfully. "Good morning, Mama." "My son!" she exclaimed happily before suddenly becoming emotional. "You're back." "Yes." She studied his face carefully. America had changed him physically. He looked wealthier, more polished, more confident, but his eyes still carried the same kindness she remembered. "Come inside," she said softly. As soon as they sat down, Obinna went straight to the point. "Mama, I need to ask you something." The older woman's expression changed immediately. "About Chidinma?" Obinna's heart skipped. So she knew something. He nodded slowly. "My family said she left." Mama Nkechi became silent. Painful silence. Obinna leaned forward anxiously. "Mama, please, tell me the truth." The old woman looked away briefly like someone fighting an internal battle. Then softly, she asked, "What exactly did they tell you?" "That she became disrespectful, then disappeared." Mama Nkechi closed her eyes sadly. "My son." Fear spread through Obinna's chest immediately. "No!" Tears gathered slowly in the woman's eyes. What they did to that girl was wickedness. The world around Obinna suddenly felt unstable. His breathing slowed. What do you mean? And then, little by little, Mom and Nkechi began telling him everything. The starvation, the insults, the pregnancy accusations, the beatings, the suffering. Every word hit Obinna like physical blows. No, he whispered repeatedly. She suffered terribly. The old woman continued tearfully. I tried helping her small when I could. Obinna's hands began shaking violently. She was pregnant. Yes. And they starved her? Mom and Nkechi nodded painfully. Tears burned inside Obinna's eyes instantly. For several seconds he could not speak. His chest felt tight, heavy, almost painful. She cried for you every day, the woman whispered. That statement broke something inside him completely. Obinna lowered his head while breathing unevenly. My God! Then came the worst part. They threw her out. His head snapped upward immediately. What? Mom and Nkechi wiped her face sadly. During heavy rain, shock swallowed Obinna whole. No! She had nowhere to go. The room suddenly felt too small, too hot, too unbearable. Obinna stood up abruptly and paced across the room while holding his head. No. Every memory now became poison inside him. Every time his mother smiled during phone calls. Every excuse. Every lie. Meanwhile, Chidinma, his pregnant wife, was suffering alone. A strangled sound escaped his throat as tears finally poured down his face openly. I left her with monsters. Mom and Nkechi's own eyes filled again. She never stopped defending you. That hurt him even more. Because despite everything, Chidinma still loved him, still trusted him, still waited for him. Obinna wiped his face roughly. Where is she now? The older woman hesitated. I heard she entered one women's shelter in town. Hope and fear collided violently inside him. A shelter? Mama Nkechi nodded. I don't know if she's still there. That was enough. Obinna immediately rushed outside. Thank you, Mama. My son. He paused briefly. When she saw the destruction inside his eyes, the older woman sighed sadly. Please find your wife. Obinna nodded once. Then he left. The black Rolls-Royce sped aggressively through town roads while Obinna sat silently in the back seat. His entire body trembled with emotion. Anger, guilt, pain, shock, everything mixed together violently inside him. His mind replayed every conversation he had with his mother over the past months. She's fine. She's eating well. She's resting. Lies. All lies. Meanwhile, Chidinma had been starving. Homeless. Pregnant. His breathing became uneven again. How could I not know? He whispered brokenly. The driver glanced nervously through the mirror but wisely stayed silent. Obinna suddenly remembered the baby clothes he bought excitedly in America, the nursery he prepared, the expensive crib assembled with happiness, while his wife slept on cold floors. Tears blurred his vision again. He covered his face briefly. I failed her. Minutes later, traffic slowed near a busy junction. Frustrated, Obinna looked outside absent-mindedly. Then suddenly, he noticed a signboard. Home of Hope Women's Shelter. His heartbeat stopped instantly. Stop the car. The driver slammed the brakes quickly. Obinna stared at the gate. Something inside him screamed, She's here. Without waiting further, he stepped out immediately. The shelter compound looked quiet and simple. A few women sat outside under trees. Children played nearby. Obinna walked slowly toward the entrance, his chest pounding violently. Then, he saw her. At first, his mind refused to accept it. A thin pregnant woman sat quietly on a wooden bench near the gate holding a small plastic plate of food. Her once full cheeks had become slimmer. Her clothes looked faded. Her body looked weak and exhausted. But despite everything, it was Chidinma. Obinna froze completely. The world around him disappeared instantly. Only her existed. For several seconds he could not breathe, could not think, could not move. Then Chidinma slowly looked up. Their eyes met. The plate slipped from her trembling hands immediately. Obinna! His chest shattered completely at the sound of her voice. Tears exploded from his eyes instantly. No hesitation, no pride, no control. He walked toward her slowly like a man approaching something sacred and broken at the same time. And the closer he came, the worse the pain became. Her swollen feet, her tired eyes, her thin body. This was not the woman he left behind. This was suffering itself. Oh my God! His voice broke completely. Chidinma stared at him like someone seeing a dream. You came back. Obinna dropped to his knees directly before her. Right there inside the shelter compound. Ignoring everybody watching. Ignoring his expensive suit touching the dusty ground. Nothing mattered anymore. Tears streamed uncontrollably down his face. What happened to you? The question shattered Chidinma emotionally. Months of pain finally burst open completely. She began crying immediately. Not quietly, not softly. Deep broken sobs from a woman who had suffered too long alone. Obinna held her tightly without caring who watched. I'm sorry, he whispered repeatedly. I'm so sorry. People nearby stared in shock. Some recognized the luxurious Rolls-Royce parked outside. Others recognized the wealthy-looking man kneeling before the pregnant homeless woman. Nobody understood the full story yet, but everyone could see the pain. Obinna slowly pulled back just enough to look at her stomach. His eyes widened emotionally. She was heavily pregnant now, very close to delivery. His hand trembled as he touched her belly gently. The baby kicked immediately beneath his palm. Obinna gasped softly. Fresh tears rolled down his face. That's my child. Chidinma nodded tearfully. Yes. Emotion overwhelmed him completely again. He lowered his forehead briefly against her stomach while crying openly. Months ago, he imagined this moment differently. He imagined joy, celebration, happiness, not heartbreak. Never this. How long have you been here? He asked shakily. A while. You were suffering all this time? Chidinma looked down silently. That silence alone destroyed him further. A shelter worker approached carefully. Sir. Obinna stood up slowly while holding Chidinma protectively. I'm her husband. The woman nodded gently. She's been through a lot. His jaw tightened painfully. I know. No, actually, he didn't know. Not fully. Not yet. But he was beginning to understand enough. And the understanding was killing him inside. He turned back toward Chidinma carefully. You're coming with me. Fear flickered briefly in her eyes. What if your family? My family? Obinna repeated bitterly. The pain inside his voice startled even her. Then softly but firmly he said, You are my family. Fresh tears rolled down Chidinma's face immediately. Without another word, Obinna removed his expensive suit jacket carefully and wrapped it around her shoulders. Then slowly, gently, he helped her stand. The moment the shelter women saw the pregnant homeless woman walking toward a Rolls-Royce beside the crying wealthy man, whispers spread everywhere. But Obinna noticed none of it. Because at that moment only one thing mattered to him now. Taking his wife home. The drive away from the shelter was completely silent. Inside the luxurious Rolls-Royce, Chidinma sat quietly beside the window while clutching Obinna's suit jacket tightly around her shoulders. Everything still felt unreal. Just a few hours earlier, she had been sitting outside the shelter wondering whether life would ever become normal again. Now Obinna was beside her. Real. Alive. Back home. For several moments, neither of them knew what to say. Too much pain stood between them. Obinna kept glancing toward her repeatedly while struggling to control his emotions. Every time he looked properly at her face, guilt tore through him again. She looked exhausted, not just physically, emotionally too. The cheerful woman he left behind months ago now carried deep sadness inside her eyes, and the realization nearly destroyed him. Finally, he spoke softly. "Are you hungry?" Chidinma hesitated briefly. Then quietly, she nodded. That answer alone shattered him further. Without wasting another second, Obinna instructed the driver to stop at the most expensive restaurant nearby. The workers nearly panicked when the luxury car pulled in. Managers rushed outside immediately. "Welcome, sir." But Obinna ignored everybody completely. His attention remained fixed only on Chidinma. He helped her out carefully like someone protecting glass from breaking. Inside the restaurant, people stared openly. The contrast between them was impossible to ignore. Obinna looked wealthy, polished, powerful. Meanwhile, Chidinma looked tired, heavily pregnant, and emotionally drained. Still, the way he held her hand revealed everything. Love. Deep, desperate love. They entered a private dining room upstairs where nobody could disturb them. The moment food arrived, Chidinma tried eating slowly and politely, but hunger eventually took over. Obinna watched silently as she ate. Each bite hurt him emotionally. How long had she gone without proper meals? How many nights did she sleep hungry while he sent millions home believing she was safe? His chest tightened painfully again. Finally, he could not take the silence anymore. "Tell me everything." Chidinma's hand stopped moving immediately. Tears gathered slowly in her eyes. Obinna reached across the table gently. "Please." For several seconds, she simply stared at him quietly. Then softly, she asked, "You really didn't know?" His face twisted painfully. "No." That answer alone nearly broke her again. Because despite all the suffering, part of her had still wondered if Obinna abandoned her intentionally. Now she could see the truth in his eyes. He genuinely had no idea. Chidinma inhaled shakily. Then slowly, she began telling him everything. First, her voice remained calm, careful, controlled. She explained how things changed after he traveled. How his mother suddenly became cold. How his sisters mocked her daily. How they treated her like a servant. Obinna listened silently. But as the story continued, his expression gradually changed. Pain turned into horror. Then horror slowly transformed into rage. "They accused me of cheating when they found out I was pregnant," Chidinma whispered tearfully. Obinna froze completely. "What?" "They said the baby wasn't yours." His entire body stiffened instantly. "No!" Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. "I tried explaining that you were with me before traveling, but nobody listened." Obinna covered his mouth briefly while breathing unevenly. "My God! They insulted me every day." His hands clenched tightly. "They called me barren before, then suddenly called me shameless after the pregnancy came." Each sentence hit him like physical punches. But the worst part was still coming. Chidinma lowered her eyes slowly. "They stopped feeding me properly." Silence. Dead silence. Obinna stared at her. "What?" She wiped her face shakily. "Sometimes I stayed hungry for 2 days." The words shattered him completely. "No! I drank water to survive." Obinna pushed his chair back suddenly and stood up. Emotion exploded violently inside him. "No!" The sound echoed across the private dining room. Tears poured freely down his face again. He turned away briefly and held his head tightly. "My wife was starving." Chidinma began crying harder now too. "I didn't know what to do." He turned back toward her slowly, looking completely broken. "I was sending money. I know. Millions. I know. Every month." His voice cracked painfully. "I know," she whispered again. Obinna staggered backward slightly like someone physically wounded. His mother had stolen everything. Everything. And while he proudly believed he was taking care of his wife overseas, she was slowly dying. The realization crushed him completely. Then Chidinma spoke again. "They beat me too." Obinna looked up sharply. "What?" "Not always. But sometimes, his breathing became dangerous now. Who touched you? She hesitated. Your mother slapped me once. Rage exploded across his face instantly. And your sisters pushed me during arguments. For several seconds, Obinna could not even speak. His body trembled violently with anger. Nobody had the right to touch his wife, especially not while pregnant. They threw me out during rain, Chidinma whispered brokenly. Those words finally destroyed the remaining control inside him. Obinna dropped back into the chair heavily and burst into tears openly. Deep, painful tears from a man drowning in guilt. I failed you. No, she cried quickly. You didn't know. But I should have known. His voice cracked loudly. I should have seen the signs. Fresh guilt consumed him viciously now. Every ignored suspicion, every strange phone call, every excuse from his mother. He should have investigated sooner. He should have protected her better. Instead, Chidinma suffered alone. All because he trusted the wrong people. I'm sorry, he whispered repeatedly. I'm so sorry. Chidinma shook her head through tears. You came back for me. That statement only made him cry harder. Because she still saw goodness in him after everything. Obinna stood again and moved toward her slowly. Then he knelt beside her chair and rested his forehead gently against her lap. I swear to you, he whispered painfully, nobody will ever hurt you again. Chidinma cried quietly while touching his hair softly. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Only tears, only pain, only love surviving through heartbreak. Then suddenly the baby kicked strongly. Both of them froze. Obinna slowly looked down toward her stomach. His trembling hand rested gently over it again. Another kick came immediately. A small emotional laugh escaped him through tears. He's active. Chidinma smiled weakly for the first time in a long while. Very active. Obinna stared at her stomach with overwhelming emotion. My child survived all this. Then fresh anger returned instantly. Because if anything had happened to either of them, he would never forgive himself. Never. Later that evening, Obinna took Chidinma to the most luxurious hotel in the city. The staff treated them like royalty immediately. But while workers rushed around respectfully, Obinna noticed something heartbreaking. Chidinma looked uncomfortable inside luxury now, almost afraid to touch expensive things. The trauma had changed her deeply. Inside the massive hotel suite, she stood quietly staring around in disbelief. Soft carpets, golden lights, massive king-sized bed, beautiful city view. Everything looked like another world. You'll stay here tonight, Obinna said softly. Chidinma looked at him uncertainly. What about you? I'm not leaving you. Emotion filled her eyes immediately. After months of abandonment and fear, hearing those words healed something inside her. Obinna called hotel staff immediately. I want a doctor here tonight. Of course, sir. And proper meals prepared. Yes, sir. Within an hour, medical professionals arrived to examine Chidinma carefully. Obinna stayed beside her the entire time. The female doctor frowned slightly after checking her vitals. She's severely stressed. Obinna's jaw tightened. She also appears malnourished. Those words made guilt slash through him again. But the baby is strong, the doctor added reassuringly. Relief flooded him instantly. Thank God. After the examination ended, the doctor smiled gently at Chidinma. You need rest now. A lot of it. Once they were alone again, silence filled the room softly. This silence felt different though. Safer. Healing. Obinna sat beside her carefully on the bed. For several moments he simply stared at her, almost like he still could not believe he found her again. Then softly he asked, Why didn't you hate me? Tears gathered instantly in Chidinma's eyes. Because I know you. His chest tightened emotionally. I thought maybe you believed them. I tried not to. Tried. She looked down sadly. There were nights I became afraid. That honesty hurt him deeply. And honestly, she whispered, part of me worried you would return rich and forget me. Obinna immediately shook his head. Never. He held both her hands firmly. Chidinma, listen to me carefully. She looked up slowly. You were with me when I had absolutely nothing. Emotion burned inside his eyes now. You fed me when I couldn't feed myself. Tears rolled down her face again. You sold Akira so I could chase my dreams. His voice broke. I can never forget that woman. Chidinma covered her mouth while crying softly. Obinna gently wiped her tears. You are the reason I survived. Then carefully, slowly, he reached into his pocket and brought out a small velvet jewelry box. Chidinma blinked in surprise. I bought this for you before coming home. He opened it gently. Inside rested the diamond necklace. Beautiful, elegant, expensive. Chidinma stared at it speechlessly. You still bought me this? She whispered emotionally. Obinna smiled sadly. I bought it for my wife. Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks again. He carefully placed the necklace around her neck, then softly kissed her forehead. And in that quiet hotel room, after months of suffering, betrayal, hunger, and loneliness, Chidinma finally felt something she had almost forgotten existed. Safety. Obinna did not sleep that night. While Chidinma rested quietly beside him inside the luxurious hotel suite, he sat alone near the large window staring out at the city lights. His jaw remained tight, his eyes swollen from crying, his chest burning with rage. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw only one thing: Chidinma starving while pregnant. The images tortured him endlessly. His mother eating comfortably while his wife drank water to survive. His sisters mocking her while she carried his child. The rain pouring on her body after they threw her outside. The pain inside him felt unbearable. Around 3 a.m., he quietly stood up and walked toward the bed. Chidinma slept peacefully for the first time in months, one hand resting gently over her stomach. Obinna stared at her silently. Then his eyes slowly moved toward her swollen feet. His chest tightened again. She had suffered too much, far too much. Carefully, he knelt beside the bed and touched her feet gently. They'll never hurt you again, he whispered softly. Then he kissed her forehead lightly before standing up again. At that exact moment, he made a decision. By morning, everything would change. The next day, the atmosphere inside the family compound felt strangely tense. Mama Uche sat outside nervously peeling vegetables while Adiz and Ifeoma whispered anxiously nearby. Since Obinna failed to return home the previous night, fear had slowly entered all their hearts. He found her, Ifeoma whispered shakily. Adiz immediately hissed. How do you know? Use your brain. Why else would he disappear? Mama Uche remained silent, but deep inside, she knew too. A mother always recognized certain things, and the anger she saw in Obinna's eyes before he left the previous day terrified her deeply. Suddenly, the sound of expensive car engines echoed outside the compound. Everybody froze immediately. The black Rolls-Royce slowly entered first. 2 additional SUVs followed behind it. Villagers nearby quickly gathered again, sensing drama immediately. Obinna stepped out slowly, but this time, there was no smile on his face, no warmth, no excitement, only cold fury. The atmosphere changed instantly. Even the villagers watching became silent. Mama Uche forced herself to stand. My son, where is everybody? His voice was calm, too calm. That alone frightened them more. Adiz and Ifeoma slowly stepped forward nervously. Obinna looked at each of them carefully. Then finally, he spoke. I know everything. Silence exploded across the compound. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed properly. Mama Uche tried forcing a laugh. What are you talking about? Obinna's eyes landed on her slowly. The starvation. Her smile disappeared immediately. The beatings. Adiz looked away quickly. The insults. Ifeoma's hands began shaking. The day you threw my pregnant wife into the rain. His voice cracked slightly on the last sentence, because even saying those words out loud hurt him deeply. Mama Uche quickly switched tactics. My son, listen. No. The single word thundered across the compound. Everybody became still instantly. For the first time in their lives, they had never seen Obinna look at them this way. Not like family. Like strangers. Dangerous strangers. She lied to you, Mama Uche said desperately. That girl manipulated. Don't. The warning in his voice silenced her immediately. Obinna stepped closer slowly. My wife defended all of you even after everything you did to her. Tears burned inside his eyes again. She still respected you. His mother swallowed nervously. My son. You starved a pregnant woman. Villagers nearby began murmuring quietly now. Shock spread across several faces. Most people knew something bad happened. But not this bad. Obinna's voice grew harsher. I was sending money every month. Nobody responded. Millions. Still silence. And while I worked day and night believing my wife was safe, his voice broke painfully again. She was sleeping on the streets. That statement hit the compound heavily. Even neighbors watching became emotional. Mama Uche finally snapped defensively. She disgraced this family. Obinna stared at her with disbelief. How? She got pregnant immediately after you traveled. For a second, complete silence followed. Then Obinna laughed bitterly. Not from amusement, from heartbreak. You accused my wife of cheating because she became pregnant with my child? Mama Uche crossed her arms stubbornly. How were we supposed to know? Obinna looked at her like he no longer recognized her. You're my mother. Emotion burned through his voice now. You knew how long we prayed for that baby. Fresh tears gathered in his eyes. You knew how much Chidinma suffered because people called her barren. The older woman looked away briefly. But Obinna was no longer finished. That woman sold Akara to send me abroad. His voice thundered louder now. She washed clothes so I could chase my dreams. The villagers murmured louder. Many of them never knew that part. Meanwhile, Mama Uche and her daughters looked increasingly ashamed. Obinna pointed toward the house angrily. Everything I became in America started with her sacrifice. Tears rolled down his face openly again. And this is how you repaid her? Nobody answered, because no answer existed. Obinna stepped closer to his mother slowly. You looked me in the eyes and lied repeatedly. My son, I was trying to protect this family. You destroyed this family. The roar startled everybody. Even children stopped talking. For several moments, only silence remained. Heavy, painful silence. Then Mama Uche's pride finally cracked slightly. She changed after you traveled, she muttered weakly. No, Obinna replied coldly. You changed after money entered your hands. That truth pierced directly, because greed truly was the root of everything. The moment wealth arrived, humanity disappeared. Meanwhile, inside the hotel suite, Chidinma sat quietly near the window while waiting anxiously. Part of her feared what might happen at the compound. Obinna had left looking emotionally unstable. She understood his pain, but she also knew anger could push people into dangerous decisions. The hotel room door suddenly opened softly. Chidinma looked up quickly. Obinna entered slowly. The moment she saw his face, she knew everything had exploded already. His eyes remained red, his jaw tight, his shoulders heavy. Without speaking, he walked directly toward her. Then suddenly, he knelt before her. Chidinma's eyes widened immediately. Obinna! He gently placed both hands over her stomach. I'm sorry. Fresh tears instantly gathered in her eyes. You already apologized. It's not enough. His voice cracked again. I trusted the wrong people. Chidinma touched his face softly. You didn't know. But I should have protected you. She shook her head slowly. You came back. That sentence destroyed him emotionally all over again. He rested his forehead gently against her lap while breathing unevenly. Then softly he whispered, I'm done with them. Chidinma froze. What do you mean? Obinna slowly looked up. I disowned them. Shock crossed her face immediately. Obinna, I mean it. His voice remained calm now, dangerously calm. They are no longer my responsibility. Tears entered Chidinma's eyes again. She understood his pain. But family separation in African homes carried deep emotional weight. They're still your family, she whispered carefully. Obinna's expression hardened painfully. Family? He laughed bitterly again. Family doesn't starve a pregnant woman. Silence filled the room. Family doesn't steal from their own son while his wife suffers. His voice softened slightly. Family protects. That statement carried deep hurt. Not just anger, betrayal. Because beyond everything else, Obinna genuinely loved his family once. He trusted them completely, and that trust had been destroyed forever. I sold the new house I was building for them, he continued quietly. Chidinma blinked. What? They won't touch another naira from me. Shock mixed with sadness inside her chest. She never wanted revenge, never wanted separation. But she also knew something important. Some wounds changed relationships permanently, and what his family did crossed every possible line. Obinna gently held her hand. I'm taking you home. She looked around the luxurious suite quietly. We're already here. No. A small emotional smile appeared on his face for the first time. I mean our real home. Realization slowly entered her eyes. America. He nodded. You and our baby are coming with me. Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks instantly. For months she survived only by imagining that possibility. Now it was finally real. You mean it? With everything in me. Emotion overwhelmed her completely. Obinna moved closer carefully and wrapped his arms around her gently. No more suffering, he whispered. No more fear. Chidinma closed her eyes tightly while resting against him. For the first time in many months, the future no longer looked dark. Back at the village compound, shame spread quickly after Obinna's confrontation. Neighbors gossiped endlessly. Many people condemned Mama Uche openly now. She starved her own daughter-in-law? While the son was sending money? God forbid such wickedness. Inside the house itself, silence dominated heavily. Adiz sat quietly staring into space. Ifioma cried repeatedly, and Mama Uche remained alone in her room, overwhelmed by regret too late to matter, because deep down, she finally understood something painful. Greed had cost her the son who once loved her completely. 2 days later, Obinna returned briefly to the village one final time. Not to reconcile, to end things properly. Villagers watched silently as movers carried furniture and documents out from the newly completed mansion he had built for his family. Cars, generators, expensive electronics, everything. Mama Uche rushed outside in panic. My son, please. Obinna looked at her coldly. You made your choice already. Tears streamed down her face. Forgive me, but the damage had gone too deep, too far. He handed property documents calmly to an agent beside him. Sell everything. Yes, sir. His mother nearly collapsed emotionally. My son, don't do this. Obinna's eyes briefly filled with tears too, because despite everything, this woman still gave birth to him, still raised him, still carried him once. But love without accountability could destroy people, and he had learned that painfully. You threw my wife away like trash, he said quietly. Emotion cracked his voice again. The woman who suffered beside me when I had nothing. Then slowly, very slowly, he stepped backward toward his car. And this time when he entered the Rolls-Royce beside Chidinma, he did not look back. 3 weeks later, Obinna and Chidinma stood together inside the international airport waiting area. This time, everything felt completely different from the day Obinna first traveled to America. Back then, they were poor, afraid, uncertain about the future. Now, although pain still lingered from everything they survived, hope had finally returned. Real hope. Chidinma sat quietly beside Obinna while holding her passport carefully in both hands. Even now, part of her still struggled believing this was truly happening. America, the same country they once discussed only through dreams and prayers whispered inside a leaking apartment. Now she was actually going there. Obinna glanced at her and smiled softly. "You're quiet." She looked at him emotionally. "I'm still trying to believe this is real." He gently squeezed her hand. "It's real." Tears gathered instantly in her eyes again. Ever since finding her at the shelter, Obinna had refused to leave her side. Completely. He attended every medical appointment personally, bought her new maternity clothes, made sure she ate properly every day. Sometimes he woke up in the middle of the night simply to check if she was breathing peacefully. The guilt inside him remained deep, though Chidinma constantly reminded him that he did not know the truth. Obinna still blamed himself heavily. In his mind, he failed to protect the woman who protected him first, and he silently vowed never to make that mistake again. A boarding announcement interrupted their thoughts. Passengers around them slowly stood up. Obinna smiled warmly. "Ready?" Chidinma looked down at her large stomach nervously. "What if the baby decides to come during the flight?" Obinna laughed softly for the first time in days. "Then our child will become an international baby immediately." She smiled weakly. That smile alone made his chest tighten emotionally again. After everything she survived, seeing her smile still felt precious. As they boarded the plane together, Obinna carefully supported her every step of the way. Flight attendants immediately recognized his status from the first-class arrangements already prepared. "Welcome aboard, sir." But Obinna barely paid attention. His entire focus remained on Chidinma. "Are you comfortable?" "Yes." "You need water?" "I'm okay." "You sure?" She laughed softly. "You've asked me that 5 times already. And I'll ask another 5. That response made her emotional again, because for months nobody cared whether she was okay. Now she was finally being loved openly again, protected again, valued again. As the airplane lifted into the sky, Chidinma stared out through the window quietly. Below them, Nigeria slowly became smaller. The land where she suffered. The land where she almost lost herself completely. Yet somehow, it was also the land where she found love. Real love. The kind that survives poverty, betrayal, distance, pain. Slowly, she rested her head against Obinna's shoulder. He kissed her forehead gently. "We're starting over." Fresh tears rolled silently down her cheeks. Yes. Hours later, they finally arrived in America. The cold air shocked Chidinma immediately the moment they exited the airport. "Jesus!" she gasped while shivering slightly. Obinna laughed warmly and quickly wrapped his expensive coat around her shoulders. "Welcome to America." Massive roads stretched everywhere outside. Tall buildings glittered brightly. Luxury cars moved smoothly across organized highways. Everything looked unreal to her. Even the airport itself felt larger than entire neighborhoods back home. As they entered the black luxury SUV waiting outside, Chidinma stared around like someone inside a dream. "You really live here?" Obinna smiled. "You'll see the house soon." During the drive, Chidinma remained glued to the window. Everywhere looked beautiful. Clean streets, bright lights, huge shopping malls. But despite all the luxury around her, one thing mattered most: peace. For the first time in many months, she felt completely safe. No insults, no fear, no tension, only peace. Eventually, the SUV turned slowly into a quiet, wealthy neighborhood lined with massive houses. Chidinma's eyes widened gradually. "Obinna!" He smiled slightly. "We're almost there." Seconds later, the car stopped before a stunning mansion surrounded by perfectly trimmed lawns and glowing lights. Chidinma froze completely. The house looked unbelievable. Modern, massive, elegant. This place. Obinna turned toward her softly. Is home. Tears filled her eyes instantly. No. Yes. She stared speechlessly at the mansion again. This was the same man who once slept hungry beside her. The same man who almost gave up on life. Now look at him. Look at what they survived to reach. As they entered the house, Chidinma became overwhelmed immediately. Everything looked luxurious. The marble floors, the grand staircase, the beautiful furniture, the giant television screens. But then Obinna guided her gently upstairs. There's something I want to show you. Curious, she followed him slowly. When he opened the next door, Chidinma froze again. It was a nursery, beautifully prepared. Soft blue walls, baby toys, tiny clothes, a white crib near the window. Everything was ready already. Emotion crashed into her instantly. You did all this? Obinna nodded quietly. I started preparing after hearing about the pregnancy. Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks immediately. Even while believing lies, even while confused, he still prepared for their child. Obinna walked toward the crib slowly. I used to stand here imagining you both beside me. His voice softened emotionally. I never imagined you were suffering all that time. Chidinma hugged him tightly before he could continue. You found us. That sentence still healed him every time. He wrapped his arms around her carefully. And I'm never letting go again. The following weeks became the healing period both of them desperately needed. Little by little, Chidinma slowly regained strength. Proper food restored her body gradually. Peace restored her mind. Though nightmares still woke her sometimes at night, Obinna always remained there immediately beside her. There's nobody here to hurt you, he whispered whenever she trembled awake. Sometimes she cried suddenly without warning. The trauma had not disappeared completely. Certain sounds still frightened her. Certain memories still hurt deeply. But now she no longer carried the pain alone. Obinna carried it with her. Every morning before leaving for work, he kissed her forehead gently. Every evening, he returned home early whenever possible. And despite his wealth and busy schedule, he insisted on helping personally with everything concerning the baby. One evening, Chidinma entered the kitchen and froze in shock. Obinna stood there watching cooking videos on his phone while trying to prepare soup. The kitchen looked disastrous. Vegetables scattered everywhere. Spices spilled. Pots overflowing. She burst into laughter immediately. Obinna! He looked up proudly. I'm cooking. This one is called cooking? He grinned shamelessly. Support your husband. That moment became one of the happiest she had experienced in a very long time. Simple joy. Simple peace. The kind money alone could never buy. One snowy evening, everything changed again. Chidinma suddenly gripped the edge of the couch sharply. Pain tightened across her stomach powerfully. Obinna! He immediately rushed toward her. What happened? Another contraction came stronger. Her eyes widened. I think it's time. Panic exploded across his face instantly. What? Within minutes, the mansion became chaotic. Obinna grabbed hospital bags nervously, called doctors repeatedly, forgot his car keys twice. Meanwhile, Chidinma laughed painfully between contractions. You're more scared than me. I'm not scared, he lied badly. She winced again. Obinna! Okay, I'm scared. Hours later, inside the hospital, Obinna held her hand tightly while doctors moved around quickly. Breathe, he kept repeating nervously. You're squeezing my hand too hard, Chidinma cried. I'm sorry. The doctors laughed softly at his panic. But beneath the nervousness, overwhelming love filled him completely. This woman had survived hell, and now she was bringing their child safely into the world. After several painful hours, A loud baby cry finally filled the room. Everything stopped. The doctors smiled immediately. "Congratulations!" Obinna froze completely. Tears instantly filled his eyes. The nurse carefully placed the newborn baby into his trembling arms. A son. His son. Tiny. Beautiful. Perfect. Obinna stared at the child speechlessly while tears rolled freely down his face. "He's beautiful," he whispered emotionally. Then slowly, he looked toward Chidinma lying exhausted on the hospital bed. Their eyes met, and in that moment, every painful memory suddenly felt worth surviving. The hunger, the betrayal, the suffering, the loneliness, because now they finally had this family. Obinna carried the baby carefully toward her. "Meet our son." Chidinma smiled weakly through tears while touching the baby gently. "He looks like you." Obinna laughed emotionally. "Thank God." She rolled her eyes softly. That tiny playful moment made both of them laugh through tears. And for the first time in many years, their laughter carried no pain behind it. Only happiness. Real happiness. Years later, Obinna and Chidinma became known as one of the most admired Nigerian couples living in America. Not because of wealth, not because of luxury cars or mansions, but because of their story. People admired how they survived hardship together, how love survived betrayal, how loyalty survived suffering. Obinna expanded his business empire successfully while Chidinma eventually started a foundation helping homeless women and abandoned mothers. Because she never forgot where she came from, never forgot the shelter that saved her. And every single night before sleeping, Obinna still held her close and whispered the same words softly into her ear. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Then Chidinma would smile gently and reply, "We survived together, and this time, nothing would ever separate them again." Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to this channel and tell us where you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.